100 days on a sinking volcanic island with the Create mod. Although honestly, I don't know if the Create mod's going to save us this time. With these realistic water physics, this whole entire island will slowly start to sink underneath the ocean. Every 10 days, the water level will rise, and I have to try to find out a way to keep my base from completely flooding. And yes, I already know what you guys are thinking. Just build up on the high ground this time, Captain. Right? Nope, that's not going to save us, because the volcanic peaks can flood too, as they spawn massive geysers with real running rivers that completely wash down the sides of the mountains. Not to mention, of course, yes, the volcanoes always have the threat of erupting, causing lava to flow with realistic physics too. But first, we just have to deal with these sharks. Knowing my luck, we won't even get past this. However though, once I do finally get out of the ocean, I start to get a good look around our new little island home. I have to admit, even though there's going to be raising water, volcanoes, tsunamis, and floods, I'm starting to see just how beautiful this island is. We've got these really cool palm trees, and this jungle over here with all these giant jungle trees. There's all these sprouts here, and in the background, sure enough, I see this massive volcano. While I'm sure there will be a ton of stuff coming up that will really frustrate me and challenge me, I have to admit, deep down, I am super excited to call this amazing, beautiful island our home for the next 100 days. And I was so preoccupied with the danger of the environment, I forgot about the danger of the mobs. Luckily though, I managed to punch this guy down and get my very first mob kill. Now, let's run out here and try to find some area to build. All of these sprouts don't give us food. We've already taken a little bit of damage, and the first night is coming. Yeah, we're already in a stressful situation, and we've barely even started. So of course, just like any other 100 days video, I get my very first wood. I get a crafting table, and even better, I actually see some grass. It's not just sprouts up here. This next little patch of grass on this little hilltop here gives me 2 seeds. There's still hope. And then I see this, and right now I'm thinking to myself, what if the water were to rise and flood in here? And then it already does, but not from the sea, but from the sky. We have a mod here, which means that every once in a while when it's raining, water will start to collect and flood. As much as I'd love to show you guys all the water physics stuff, the mobs are already starting to hurt me. And honestly, I made a huge mistake here. I took a ton of damage, and I'm already down to less than 4 hearts. I get the sword, and I make quick work of these guys, but with no food, I'm in real danger right now. Although, I'm still pretty distracted by all the water physics here. This is just a little bit of rain on day 1. And yes, I promise you, it gets so much worse. I let this water flow down to the bottom of the crater, but you'll have to take my word for it. Looks like there's a ton of mobs down there, and I'm not going to go and look at all the water collecting down there. I don't know if I'd make it out if I did. Then, I continue to keep on playing with the water physics, as I break down the sandbar and start to watch as the ocean floods into this crater. It's pretty cool that I can change the surface of the island. I can actually flood this. I don't have to use a bucket and carry around water sources like vanilla. At the same time though, I'm being a little silly here. I definitely shouldn't flood this area. After all, I have to worry about getting serious here. The mobs are getting pretty bad, and without any home, I have to be really careful here. We could end this playthrough really fast. So my next plan is I'm going to break down this tree, and I hope it has some apples. Although to be honest with you, I didn't know this at the time, I probably should, but jungle trees do not give apples. They will give us a little bit of shelter though. I hide up in the top of this tree and try to stay away from mobs for the rest of the night. But it was smart, because the sun rises and all the mobs are no longer going to be a problem, at least until the next night. That means we have to hurry and use this time as quickly as we can to find ourselves an area to build. When of course I see that the water level is already starting to rise. You can see that these grass blocks here means that they used to be dry and above land. The water has creeped up maybe 1/8 of a block and is just barely starting to flood in right on the coastline. Which means I go back to check, and sure enough, that sandbar has been breached, and water is now starting to flow down into the crater. This is really upsetting. Like, I know it might look kind of cool, but here's the thing. I'm watching the water flood this island on day 1. I've literally got nothing done. I barely have a wooden sword, and already the water level is covering up a huge amount of land. I mean, look at this. The entire bottom of this crater is already starting to fill up with water. This is kind of crazy if you think about it. I thought I was going to have at least 10 days before this started to happen. I jump down and I see that there is a raging torrent of water spilling into this crater. and in no time at all, a ton of it is already filled in. Most of the crater bottom is covered in water, and the deepest parts are now 5 blocks deep. This went from crater to lake in one day. I can actually look at the water flowing from the ocean into this first area. Then it flows over this tiny basalt wall into the last area. It's pretty amazing, and it's really cool to watch, but I should probably pay attention to my health bar, as we're now down to 1 heart. As cool as it is to watch these water physics, I could sit here and watch this all day. I really have to hurry. Not only is my island getting much, much smaller, but I'm going to need every little square inch of it to try to save myself. This is getting a little bit too dangerous. So of course, I'm going to compromise. I want to be as far away from the volcanoes as possible, but still try to build on the highest peak I can, well above the rising ocean. The good news is I find this lake right here. I see some magma blocks at the bottom, and I realize this must be a freshwater spring. So I decide this beautiful little lake right here is where I'm going to build my house. Of course, before I start doing any of that, I immediately have to get some food. I have been hanging out on 1 heart for way too long in any hardcore playthrough. I start to throw down my seeds and honestly start praying. My life depends on these little seeds. Luckily, I have a little bit of bone meal from fighting all those skeletons, so I managed to get myself my first piece of wheat. Unfortunately, after all the bones used up, it's only 2 pieces. Yeah, that means not enough to get bread, so we're still really in trouble here. And now, I'm desperate enough, I have to resort to my last option. I know that this ocean is full of sharks, but I don't have a choice. I have to jump down here and find some food. There's kelp, which is good. This might just save me if I really get desperate, and let's be honest, I kind of am. But also, I managed to find a little school of fish here. And luckily, I can slap just a few of them up. This might be exactly what I need to keep me alive. Of course, if I run out of air, it won't matter very much. So after I slap these, I immediately get up to the surface. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, that's about the closest I've ever been to dying on a 100 days playthrough. Back on the shore, I take a deep breath, and I realize this 100 days playthrough might be more challenging than I thought. Like, I'm barely surviving. We haven't even gotten to the lava or the flooding yet. This could be challenging. So I decide I'm going to be a little cheesy here and play super safe. Instead of building a house, which might take too long, I'm going to just immediately dig down underground. I make a pick and a shovel and start to dig my little hobbit hole underground to survive the night. I throw down my furnace, and now that I'm locked in here and I can start to cook up my fish and kelp, I actually might just have a chance. And look, I even found some iron. Maybe my luck really is starting to turn around. Finally, I start to get some of my hearts back. Whew, can't tell you how good that feels. And while I'm very happy to have a full belly, I gotta admit, my eyes are still struggling a little bit here because it is pitch black. I definitely don't want to go up to the surface at night, but I also don't want to be in the dark down here either. So it's a good thing that the first thing we find is a little bit of coal. We can turn this into a torch, of course, and now we have a little bit of light. We managed to shine our newfound light on a little bit of iron here, and speaking of light, I decide to peek my head out to see if there's any daylight. And there's not, which means I will continue to cower deep in this hole. However, hiding away doesn't save me from the mobs, as I find this guy down here too. I also managed to summon up a little bit of bravery as I go into this room where I'm rewarded with just some rotten flesh. But honestly, I'll take it. And since all of these mobs are scaring me a little bit too much here, I decided it's finally time. I use some of my iron, and I get at least a chest plate. Unfortunately, with no more iron, I can't get any more armor, but at least I can get a shield. The good news is we did find just enough iron. All we have to do now is wait a little bit for all of it to cook, and soon we should be able to get ourselves some pants. But without a full kit, I'm not really comfortable going out at night because of mobs. Not that that saves me, because I go down in my mine shaft, and of course, I find another skeleton. This shield turns out to save my butt here. Just barely, I managed to survive this. But if I really want to feel safe, I'm going to have to use this bone meal to get a little more food. So we head up to the top, and it turns out everything looks pretty safe. And that's good. What's bad is that the wheat hasn't grown at all, so it turns out we're really going to need that bone meal. The first 3 pieces of wheat go to making bread. That's not very efficient, but I'm desperate, so we're going to have to do it. And with my very first piece of bread, I'm starting to relax a little bit. I'm thinking maybe finally I can actually start to enjoy this vacation. That bread gives me an extra heart, and after all, this is still a beautiful island paradise. And so I decide I'm going to go explore the island paradise just a little bit. I head out behind my little hobbit hole and start to go through the giant, deep jungle on this island. I head all the way back to where I started to see this giant crater, and yes, it is filling up with water. But this time it's pretty intense. I look around to see that the beach we started in has really started to rise. The water is way higher than when we started out. Now in my mind, I'm thinking it's probably a good idea that we preserve as much dry land as we can. After all, this island's not getting any bigger. So I take some of these planks that I have and I quickly try to throw out some kind of little dam to stop the flooding as much as possible. Maybe later in the playthrough, I can try to use some sponges or some pumps and try to reclaim this land. All I know right now is that the more flooding goes on, the worse it is for me. So even though this is terrifying to watch the water flow like this dam does make me feel a little bit better. I do decide to jump down and actually look in the water. I don't know, what is this water, like 10 blocks deep? And remember guys, this used to be bone dry land. This used to be a crater, and now it's filled up with water. This is honestly pretty amazing. I'm standing on top of this little basalt pillar. Remember when this used to be a little hill? This used to be the high ground. Now it's underwater. This is crazy. And it's at this point I have to make a little confession here. It's obviously terrifying that we're flooding, and I'm very scared of this. But at the same time, is it okay if I say, this is so cool? Like, I love the realistic water physics. It's actually made a lake. This is something that I always wish would happen whenever I play vanilla Minecraft. And actually playing Minecraft while it's happening is pretty amazing. As the sun is setting, I take one last look at this crazy change in the landscape. It's amazing that only 2 days ago, this was dry land. Back down in my little hobbit hole, I get a second to breathe. The bad news is that the island is flooding, and I'm almost certainly going to die. The good news is, I do have a couple fish, so there's that, right? However, there is some more actual good news. We find a little bit of redstone, and even find some diamonds too. I don't know how these are going to stop the island from sinking, but look, let me dream here. I then run into another big problem with the water physics. While I'm mining, I break into this room that is already flooded, and the water starts to rush in. It can quickly start to fill this whole place up, and I might start to drown. I gotta plug this little area up pretty quickly so that it doesn't flood. And the water isn't the only thing that has realistic physics. Lava will also pour out of its source. It spreads a lot further, and I have to be careful about it. And while all the drowning and unpredictable lava is bad, finding some zinc right here on day 4 is pretty good. Speaking of drowning, I find that the ocean is flooding into this cave. That's where all this water has been coming from. I try to swim up, but I gotta admit, the flow is pretty intense. Pretty soon, this entire ravine will be filled up with water. I come to the surface and realize that it's right outside of my base. While a lot of the ravines and underground areas are flooding, the good news is this beach and this entire island is looking perfect. I even see these giant volcanoes. If it gets really bad, I can always move to the top of these. I know it won't flood this bad, right? I know it's already starting to flood down here though. I could see that these blocks with grass have already been covered with water. The water has definitely come up this high. That's bad. What's even worse is I'm now malnourished. You can see my protein is way too high, and I don't have any other nutrients to balance me out. This massively slows me down. Even when I'm at full food, I can no longer sprint. This might be a bigger problem than all the water. I have to deal with this right away. And that night, I really feel the malnourishment hurt me here. I can't run and chase down these skeletons, and they get a chance to take a bunch of shots at me. If I didn't have a shield here, I'd be in real trouble. So because of that, I decide to finally do something a little bit intelligent. For the entire night, I'm gonna hide away here. Just before I dip my head away though, I make one slightly dangerous decision. I head out to the water, and I go and grab some kelp, so that hopefully I'll have some source of food that isn't protein. But I find out really quickly that this might have not been worth it. I start to really get in some bad positions here. I can't chase down these skeletons, and pretty quickly, they have me all the way down to 2 hearts. I have to avoid all these creepers and just barely manage to make it back to my base. Yeah, we're not doing that again. From now on, we stay inside at night. But it wasn't all bad. I craft up a smoker, and now I can cook up all this kelp. So hopefully I have some kind of food source that isn't just, well, rotten flesh all day. Yeah, dried kelp and rotten flesh. I wouldn't call it a buffet here. Not the best diet I've ever had, but I mean, technically this is an improvement here. And speaking of improvement, I do finally decide I'm going to use those diamonds I found and make my very first diamond pick. That's really going to help me out. What's not going to help me out is I only have enough string to make 2 wool. No bed for us, which means we can't sleep through the night and avoid all these mobs. So, after cowering away a sleepless night, I see that it's day 5, which means it must be daylight out. Sure enough, it's time for us to sneak our way out. Now that we're safe to go outside, of course we decide to go mining instead. I get some iron, but more importantly, we finally find some copper. Now that we have some zinc, we could combine this and start to get some brass, although that's still a little ways away. What's a far more pressing issue is that some of the sand has fallen through. We've struck the bottom of the ocean, and now the sea is flooding into this little cavern. With this realistic water physics, you can actually dig out a hole and all the water can drain here. So now we can start mining in here without drowning. Of course, if we do too much mining, we might end up digging up into the ocean again, and well, I'm not going to be able to drain the whole ocean. In fact, as I'm swimming away, I decide it's probably a smart idea to plug this up. I know it doesn't seem like much, but I really don't want all of my digging areas to be filled with water. That would be a huge problem. For right now, the ADD has definitely got the better of me because I see that I have some wheat, and I'm way more excited about actually getting some real food. No offense, Kelp. I could go the vanilla way, but that means 3 pieces of wheat for 1 bread. Not good. But if I use the create mod and a mill, I could turn 1 wheat into 1 flour, or potentially even 3 flour. That sounds like a better deal. And so, finally, all the way on day 5, I won't make you guys wait anymore. We're gonna get started on our very first create machine. However, it's not quite that simple. I start to see another big problem. It's raining. And in this mod pack, rain will collect and make more water start to appear on the surface. Water is starting to flood down the stairs into my little base. Now, I don't have to just worry about the rising sea level, because if there's too much rain, I could actually start to flood from rainwater alone down in this little hole if I don't have enough drainage. But still, I have to hurry. As I go up to the surface, I see that there's tons of puddles forming everywhere, and they're getting bigger and bigger as the rain continues. I decided it would probably be smart to block up the walkway so that water doesn't come pouring down here. With that done, we have at least a little bit of time to focus on getting our food. We put down the mill. Then we put down a small cog. Now I could put a hand crank on this and get started, but by adding this larger cog, as you guys already know from all my other create videos, you can manage to double the speed of your machines. That means we can mill food up much quicker. And I'm not done just there. I decide I'm going to double it again by adding another large cog. So I throw in the hand crank, and yeah, too good to be true. It turns out my tiny little arms just don't have the strength to move all this torque. I've been skipping arms day at the gym, and I just can't push this thing. It's not all bad though. I just have to take away that large cog, which does cut the speed in half, but we still have a pretty good little setup here that requires just a little bit of elbow grease. When you use the hand crank, you immediately use a ton of food, which means that this machine that makes us food also consumes food to run it. So yeah, definitely not very efficient. However, for now it will do, because we managed to get ourselves 12 flour. All we have to do now is combine that flour with some water. Luckily, we do have tons of water in this world, so that's not going to be a problem. 1 wheat plus 1 flour equals 1 dough. Perfect. As soon as we throw this in the smoker, we're on our way to our first piece of bread. For our first create success there, that was pretty easy to figure out. I cannot figure out why bread would have fruits involved in it, but you know what? I'm not a nutritionist, so I'll take the carbs, veggies, and fruit, and more importantly, I'll take that little bit of food to fill up our grumbly bellies. What we don't need is more water rushing into my face. I break the stone to find out that the rain has been filling up the stairwell. Speaking of flooding, I see that this mine shaft has slightly filled with water from when we were digging under the ocean. However, I think I can actually use this. With the realistic water physics mod, you cannot make an infinite water source like you could in vanilla. So every time we get some water, it's pretty precious. Now we can use all this to make 9 dough. That means pretty soon we're going to have 10 bread, which is not too bad. In addition, we finally have about 30 copper, and now we can cook up our zinc. Unfortunately, you can't make brass unless you go to the Nether, so I know that I'm eventually going to end up there, and I'm definitely going to need a diamond sword. But before I get started with that, I'm going to make myself an axe to start to cut down some wood. Also, I definitely need more wheat coming, because 10 bread is not going to keep us going forever, so I get a hoe and get ready to expand the farm upstairs. The good news is, I managed to get a few of these palm logs out as supports for my new house, and I expand the farm, so now we have a decent amount of wheat growing. The bad news is the rain has not stopped, and now almost every inch of open ground is covered in at least a little bit of water. This is starting to become a legitimate problem here. Because of all this rising water, I've made the decision that I'm not going to put my house on the floor. That's why I'm putting out all these palm logs so we can start to build up and put our house at an elevated position. Yes, I know, usually the captain builds his base right on a river that's about to flood or directly in the path of an oncoming tsunami, so I decided to actually use my brain this time. By building up here far away from the water and up on top of stilts, I should be pretty safe from any floods, whether it's coming from the sea or the rain. Because we're making good progress, I get a little bit greedy and decide to stay up all night, heading out to try to get some wood. There are a ton of mobs that have spawned all around my base. The shield and diamond sword come in handy, but it is still super dangerous out here. I have to run downstairs to hide. I plug everything up to make myself safe, set the bed down, and I decide that I'd like to continue on this hardcore playthrough. So I go to bed and wait out all the mobs. I start day 7 with a little bread for breakfast, and pretty soon I start to use even more unique blocks from the Macabre Bridge mod. These supports here look kinda nice, almost like they're primitive stilts, and I decide I'm going to be using them in my build a whole lot. I make this little archway at the door of our base, and I'm sold. This is the block we're going to be using. I then continue to build and experiment with new blocks throughout the night. But I gotta be honest, it's pretty dark here, so it's not too great to look at this. So I'm skipping ahead to the next day, so that hopefully you guys can at least see what's going on. I see these palm stockade fences here, and I decide to build these as well. I run these all the way around the bottom of the base, and I gotta say, I'm loving this. At the end of the day, the framework for the house is looking pretty good. I decide to go to bed to pass away the night as soon as I can on day 8. And by the start of day 9, I'm getting a good look at my progress so far. And I gotta say, using this brand new palm wood, as well as these new blocks from Macaw's mod, it's looking pretty good. My idea here is I wanted to make a little tropical hut in my island paradise. However, it's not completely done yet. We still have to keep all the important stuff like the mill down here. So I grind up some more food. I mean, I really grind up. Like by the time I'm finally done, I almost starved myself. I'm at like 2 shanks of food. And the water physics mod is not done being a pain in my butt. With no infinite water, I've run out of water down here, and I have to go up above to the surface to collect the rainwater off of the ground. And while I'm definitely got quite a rumbly tummy here, I managed to get enough dough so that we should have a decent amount of bread. Hopefully now we won't be too hungry. We can go out and collect a ton of wood and finally get our house finished. We're getting pretty close here, and all the walls, floors are all set up pretty good, and I'm really loving how this is looking so far. I start to set up some torches because I think that's an appropriate lighting source, and I'm loving it so much, I decide to make it official. I grab my bed, as well as using the Carry On mod to pick up a chest full of items. I then move it upstairs and officially move in to my brand new little house. I put my bed down, but unfortunately I took a little too long. The mobs have already started to collect outside, so I'm gonna have to get rid of them before I can go to sleep. I managed to chop them all down, then I make myself a little gate here to keep them all from coming inside. Now I can finally head to bed. And apparently, a good night of solid sleep has fixed our ears because our audio has finally come back, just in time to see me get absolutely shish kebabbed by all these arrows. Once again, the shield really saves me here, and even though it gave its life bravely defending me, it did a good job because I barely managed to get out of this. And with all the bread I've cooked up, I managed to regen my health and continue on. I get a ton of wood. These custom roofs here are really expensive. It takes 3 logs to make one, but they look really good. I really want to try them out in this build. And so I get up top and start setting down all of these custom slanted roofs. They're looking pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. I then try to set up the next level, and I'm having some problems here. These roofs are a little bit complicated, and I hadn't quite figured out how to implement them yet. So unfortunately, I had to do a little bit of reworking here. I did manage to put these down here where they have this cool little slope at the bottom, and I really like this. I'm loving the way the very bottom flicks out there, and I decide that this is how I'm going to use them. However, I'm going to use the more standard looking 45-degree slopes here to make the body of the roof, and so I get started doing that and continue to build all the way up. And you guys know me, my OCD is not going to let me just throw down some roofs and walk away. I want to make sure you guys get the very best build. And the Tiki Hut and all these new blocks are pretty good. What's not so good is now the rain is continuing to fall down, and all of the creeper holes are quickly starting to fill up and make little ponds all around the island. Anywhere that's a flat area is immediately starting to become a swamp. The water's starting to flood everywhere. It becomes really dangerous because now it's difficult to run around. Everywhere I go, I'm slowed down and have to trudge through the water. And in addition to that, any place on this island that's even a slight depression is immediately going to fill up with water. So you can guess how this giant crater from day one is starting to look. Even with my wall setup trying to hold all the water back, it is really starting to flood up. In fact, the rainwater is getting so high that very quickly the water starts to overflow. And now here on day 10, the ocean has risen at least one entire block and has come so high that even this bridge here that's a second block high isn't stopping it. Even though I'm trying not to let the island flood, this might get out of my hand right here. I don't know what I'm going to do about this. I can't just build up a wall and try to hold back the entire ocean. The entire face of this island is starting to change. This whole place is now almost 2 whole blocks lower into the ocean. The water is flowing in from every angle. Building a wall won't help now. I just have to accept that this entire crater is going to fill up with water. This is pretty much over. No matter how much I tried to build at this point, this little area is definitely going to flood. I head home, and while I am being shot in the butt, the good news is there isn't that much flooding. A couple of the flat spots definitely are getting covered with water, but the highest ground is still pretty dry. We might have to retreat there if the water goes up another block. The good news is, because I built my house a block higher, I am absolutely safe even though the water is getting really high. The bad news is, a creeper just blew a hole directly in the middle of my base. I survived, barely, but now there's a huge crater that of course is immediately filling up with water directly underneath my base. It's not that bad though. The bed wasn't ruined, none of my chests were ruined, and I do manage to pretty quickly repair all the damage. I checked to see that it's day 11. And so now I realize that every 10 days, the water level is almost certainly going to rise. So I definitely need to work on getting a new farm that's at least somehow safe from the raising water levels. It looks like we don't have much time. The rain is really starting to come down. If it adds up soon, all of this wheat will be wiped away. So I harvest and start grinding up as much as I can while I still have it. Although I can't get too carried away here. I grind myself down to half a shank of food and almost work myself to death. I barely managed to get 1 piece of bread and get me back to 3 hearts. Sadly, I'm out of water now, but I have an idea. In this mine shaft that was flooding before, I start to dig upwards and get back to the sea level so that this whole mine shaft will start to flood again. Now, if I'm not careful and I let this just run loose, like it is right now, it'll flood my base. That's not great. It also would be not great if I let it drown me, and I have to very quickly dig my way out. But I do, and I managed to set this up so that there's a tiny little airlock system here. See, the ocean will flood in and fill up this little square here, but it can't go any higher and spill out into my base. By doing this, we've sort of cheated the system, and we sort of hacked our way into an infinite water source. Pretty soon, we're swimming in bread. Is that a pun? Because of all the water? Anyway, the first thing I want to do is finish off my house so that the rainwater doesn't flood us. I try to go to bed, but the monsters are keeping me up. So now I have to run outside and try to clear the area out. Luckily though, I managed to avoid the phantoms and get some sleep. When the sun rises on day 12, I know exactly what I have to do. I go out and get a ton of jungle wood so that I can finally make all of the roofs I need to hopefully finish off the house. As I get up to the very top here, I decide I want to try something new out and get even more steeply slanted roofs. It's a little tricky and takes me an entire day, but finally that night, I have the very, very top of my little tiki hut done, and I gotta say, I'm super proud of it. And so, I plop my little head down, take a rest here. At the very beginning of day 13, I head out to see this beautiful little tiki hut. And in the daylight, I gotta say, I am loving this thing. I love all the new blocks that I used. The palm wood is perfect, and all the macaw's custom blocks are looking really, really good. It's a humble little house, but I'm on vacation after all. I'm not trying to make myself a mansion. This is exactly what I was hoping for in this playthrough. And while I'm super excited that I was smart enough to build it up on stilts, I cannot deny the fact that I am still in a lot of danger. This farm, my food source, could quickly be wiped out. So, let's get started. I immediately start to grab some logs, and then I start to make another raised platform out of jungle wood. I also decide to use macaw's bridges and make this tiny little pathway that leads right from my house onto this new platform we're building. By that night, we have a good foundation set out. All we have to do now is fill everything in. So I start to get some slabs and set them down an entire block lower. Look, I don't think I'm spoiling anything here. We all know what I'm doing, right? I start to grab some dirt and lay all of this out on top of the brand new platform. Right on the start of day 14, I get myself a little bit of breakfast, and then I head out to grab some dirt. I figured this is already underwater, so it's not like I'm stealing from the island, right? And of course, Captain gets to do what Captain loves best, and I start to spend my vacation building out my permanent farm. We put out a few wheat seeds, and I'm not gonna lie, pretty boring. I'm a little bit desperate here. I can't be too fancy. I get in a boat, and I start to head out. Before I leave, I look behind me, and I gotta say, this is so cool looking. I love this little tiki hut. I also love that I find some grass right away. The entire reason I'm out on this boat is to try to grab some seeds and do a little more exploring of the entire island, including this brand new area over here. This area doesn't have any sand, it's all black sand and volcanic ash. But pretty quickly, I see that there isn't just white and black sand, as I see this tiny little island here that looks like it has cherry blossom trees. That's pretty cool. I can't get too distracted though, still gotta make sure I'm getting all my seeds. As I continue to explore and head over to this new island, I see that there are in fact 2, maybe even 3 volcanic peaks. I had no idea just how big this island was. Now I'll admit, I want to keep this playthrough nice and tropical, but if you guys know anything about the captain, the cherry wood is one of my favorites, so there's no way I'm going to completely pass this up. I then find this big beauty out here, who's probably the only other person that's in my weight class. Guys, meet Moby. And as much as I'd like to hang out with Moby all day, I'm in a little bit of a rush here, so I have to keep focused and keep on moving. I then see that the 2 volcanoes are joined, and in the middle there's a pretty big basalt wall. This is pretty cool. It's a little bit of an elevated area that we might be forced to move to, if the floodwater continues to happen. And let's be honest, we know it's gonna happen. I also look out to see just below the basalt, there's this really cool lagoon and a massive white sand beach. It would have been a really good spot to build in. Well, of course, if there wasn't so much flooding, it would have been a good spot to build in. Also, on this little basalt ridge, there's tons of dirt here and areas where I can grow, and there's even dark oak, another one of my favorite woods. Unfortunately, for like the 3rd time, I can't get too distracted here. I have to stay moving and keep focused on my goal. I start to head home, but I gotta say, this is a beautiful island. Unfortunately, it is flooding, so I have to get back home, where I continue to add on to our farm, way up in the sky where it is safe from all that flooding. I start to use some of my bone meal. I really just want to grow this so I can get some seeds to spread and finish up this farm. Fortunately, I don't get anywhere close, but I decide that I'm pretty sure the floods will continue to rise and this farm will be wiped out. I head down here because I think it's finally time to admit defeat and just wipe out this entire farm and move all the seeds up where they're safe. And while I love farming, I'm not in love with the mobs. I set out some torches, so hopefully I can get some rest. Then we start day 15. The big thing we're going to be tackling is getting started with create proper. Hand cranks are great and everything, but if we don't have a legitimate power source and a little lab going, are we really playing create? So of course we start out with the very first machine that you'll need in any create playthrough, the mechanical press. I set that up here in the base. However, I gotta say, it's looking pretty lonely. I head down into my hobbit hole and I start to break down all the machines in the mill. It's about time we move these up above the surface. We're gonna have to build yet another platform where we can set everything up. Which of course means we need a lot of wood, and we spend the rest of day 15 chopping down a bunch of jungle trees. That night, as we start to build the new platform, I decide to go for these supports instead. I want to switch things up from just making a bunch of logs like I normally do. Not only on this new platform, but on the old platform that's holding up the farm as well. I immediately connect the platform with these amazing bridges. Once again, we start setting out even more slabs to cover up this platform. And by the beginning of the next day, we're starting to make some good progress. All of these walkways are amazing and help us get from platform to platform without the raising water levels even being a problem. One of the very first things we're going to make is the windmill sails. Unfortunately, this does require wool, and we're really tight on wool, so we only get 16 sails to start. That's going to have to do. I head to the back of this platform to set down a large cog, a windmill bearing, and soon I start to set up the sails. Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you guys, it's looking pretty pathetic, but honestly, it's going to have to do for right now. We now start to set up some smaller cogs. And like we always do, we're going to be adding a large cog with a small cog off to the side, which once again does double the speed every single time. This is really important. One, because windmills are just naturally very slow, but also a super small windmill like this will be extra slow. If we don't speed this up or do some kind of trick like this, it'll essentially be useless power. We turn on this windmill and see what we've got. A mild breeze means that it's, well, a mild windmill, but it's something. And I see that the very last cog in the whole set is actually moving at a decent speed. However, just to make sure, we're going to go a little risky here and add on a few more large cogs and try to speed this up just a little bit. The first thing we set up is the little millstone. And remember guys, I need this millstone for my food, for my survival, so it doesn't look too impressive, but it's very important. Speaking of survival, I throw some bone meal in there. Hopefully we can get a little bit more food. But you guys definitely didn't come here to see me use the mill again. We set out the depot, and then on top of that, we set out our mechanical press. Now we just have to figure out how we're going to power it. I set up a vertical gearbox. This combined with a few shafts should get power running right into this mechanical press. All right, there we go. No overstressed. I think this might actually work. Let's test it out. We set it down, and although we can't hear the bonk, we can feel the bonk in our hearts. While our ears might not be working, the more important thing is that this whole machine setup does. We're finally getting some real create machines going. We do use that bone meal on some of the crops. Then on day 16, we head down to do a little bit of mining. I managed to find some iron, which is good, but more importantly, I find some lava. And with this weird funky water physics, we do manage to get our first obsidian. We're gonna need that. We're also gonna need some air, which again, with these funky water physics, we almost drowned ourselves. I keep forgetting that our mine shafts can completely flood. No matter how much I play with this, it's still a little bit tricky. We keep on mining all the way to day 17, but we're rewarded with a few diamonds. I pop my head up to the surface to see that it's still day 17, which is good, we have plenty of time, and now we're gonna get started on making our first true contraption with Create. If you guys already know what I'm gonna build, don't give it away, although I will admit, it's pretty obvious. We start to smash up some iron, and we get ready to make some propellers. Unfortunately, we did run out of andesite. The good news is we found a little pocket of that, which we can go and collect pretty quickly. By the night of day 17, we have enough andesite to make our encased fan. I've said this 100 times, but as you guys already know, one of my favorite things to do in any tech mod is to try to double our ores. It's a little bit goofy in the Create mod, but it's definitely worth it in my opinion. That is where this encased fan comes into play. With another vertical gearbox, we set this up and get it powered. And we even get a little bit lucky too, because it's blowing outwards, which is exactly what I want. Getting blown up my platform by this fan, not so good news. I'm definitely gonna have to be careful about that in the future. But for right now, we can put some water right here, and soon it will start to blow this watery air, which will wash anything that falls in front of the fan. First of all, that's super useful, because now maybe I'll be a little less stinky. All I gotta do is stand here. But more importantly than that, this is actually gonna help us double our ores. So let's get to that. All we have to do now is take any ores that we want to double and put them into the mill. This will then crush them up. However, just before I do that, I actually forgot. I put a ton of wheat into the mill, but this is actually good too. And instead of having to do this one by one and get 64 buckets and make 64 dough, I can throw this in the washer. And then all at once, automatically, it will be turned into dough. But honestly, who cares if you survive if you're poor? I'd much rather get some more material items, like gold or iron. Now we can throw this ore into the mill. Pretty quickly, it's turned into crush iron. Now, all we have to do to use this is to throw this in the washer. Pretty quickly, it will turn the crushed iron into iron nuggets. One piece of crushed iron turns into 12 nuggets, which only makes one iron ingot, but it leaves some extra nuggets. And in the long term, this can get you way more than just the 31 iron you would get if you were to smelt this. And now, I will admit, this little setup here, it is extremely primitive. I mean, it's not automated. It's not very efficient either. It will help us get a little bit more yield, and now we'll have to do a little less mining. We're gonna need that iron too. We immediately throw it into our bonk machine. And as you guys can hear, not only are we gonna get iron sheets, but apparently we get our hearing back, as once again, we finally get the audio back. We use those iron sheets to make these empty basins. I go a little ways underground, underneath my base. I start to carve out an area and set down all of our obsidian. I put a door here because I'm afraid that any rainwater that comes in here might start to flood in this area. The door should keep this area nice and dry. I hope. We light this up, then we head inside. In any 100-day playthrough, or I mean, I come to think of it, anytime I ever play Minecraft, I hate the Nether, so I make sure I'm here as little as possible. I'm putting out some breadcrumbs to make sure I don't get lost, and I immediately start to look for the first fortress I can find. It takes a while, but finally I just barely manage to see one down in this valley. I then have to dig my way down there, but I do manage to find it. The only thing I hate more than the Nether is wither skeletons. I cannot stand to watch my health bar turn black like that. It is something weird and visceral. I just hate it. So I kill this thing as quick as I can. And I get pretty lucky, because immediately after killing the second one, I see a blaze. I capture it and get our very first blaze burner. Now, as much as I want to get out of this place, I do decide that it might be a good idea to get a few of these things. You can never have too many blaze burners. Pretty quickly, I find these two, and I manage to slap one up. So now I also have some blaze powder if I need that. Pretty quickly, I also managed to capture another 2. I end up with a total of 3 blaze burners and a blaze rod. Now it's definitely time to get out of here. I spend the next day running all the way home. And although it took 2 whole days in the Nether, I now have everything I need, so hopefully I never have to come back here. Now, we're back to the island on day 19. Unfortunately, it is the very end of day 19, and day 20 has just begun. And this is bad, because just like I had predicted, every 10 days we get an event. Sure enough, the water has severely risen. It's gotten up so high now that it has completely engulfed all of the beaches. It's flooded all the way up to the small freshwater lake, and it's completely covered up my farm. In addition, the rain has started again, which means that now there'll be even more water. It's wiped out all my torches now, so I have to watch out for mobs again. And, well, it turns out it was a pretty good idea to put all of my stuff on stilts, because just like we'd predicted, the water level has risen up and completely engulfed all of the ground below all of my builds. My base would have been underwater, my farm would have been underwater. Look, I can even see that my mine shaft is about to be underwater. I run around to see that almost everywhere is now covered in water. What's worse is the water seems to be getting deeper and deeper inland. I'm basically walking through now a lake that used to be dry land. There are still a few spots though at the very highest ground that are dry and that are okay. However, as you guys probably could already predict, that very first crater from day 1 is now completely filled in. You wouldn't even know that this used to be dry land. It just looks like the ocean now. And speaking of the ocean, I see that it's now risen almost a full 4 blocks. It is now completely washed up to the palm tree level. I then head over to the front of the island where that huge beach was. And sure enough, I see that the water has risen all the way in. It's covered up almost all of this beach. It's almost connected with the lagoon. This entire beach, almost all of my vision, is now underwater. The water has gone a huge distance. It looks like it's almost covered 200 blocks worth of beach. Then, I quickly learn that it didn't just cover up the beach, it's covering the beach. The water level is rising right now underneath my feet. It has now completely covered the beach and connected with this lagoon. I then go back to see the tiny little bridge of black sand that I crossed to get here is now also flooding. The ocean is pouring into this lagoon from this direction as well. Soon, all of this sand here will be covered up. Honestly, if I'm being real with you, this is kind of cool. The water physics is so amazing that it changes the environment around you in a way that feels so real, and yet isn't a part of Minecraft. I've never seen something like this before. That being said, it is obviously extremely terrifying. The water level continues to rise and is now covering up everywhere I'm going. The entire surface of this island is completely changed. Massive chunks of it are now underwater. And it's not done yet. This little piece of sand that I thought would be an island, even it's flooding. The sea has now risen up almost an entire 5 blocks. And now even this little beach is going to be underwater. I run around to see that these bushes are now almost underwater. All of this area here that has green grass, all of this used to be above water. The water continues to rise, and now all of the sand, white sand and black sand, is all underwater. This is crazy. This entire beach has been completely flooded and is gone. I continue to go around the island to see how bad it is, and I see that this whole area here, this flat basin, is also underwater. This whole area of another 100 blocks, this used to be above water too. And now it's all a shallow ocean. It's a good thing I didn't build over here after all. This is insane. I actually stop and I can see it flooding right before my eyes. I'm seeing the water level come up above this sand, above this tiny little island, live right in front of me. At this point, I'm starting to realize that things are getting a little crazy. I have to craft a boat. But just before I do, I get a little piece of good news. There's some tropical gardens here that will have Pam's Harvestcraft crops. The first time I've seen Pam's Harvestcraft in this entire playthrough. The bad news is I'm now realizing that the water level rising has probably wiped out a lot of these crops. I probably missed a huge opportunity to get a ton of different types of food. So before I go to bed, I absolutely make sure to search the rest of the island to see if I can find any. As I go around, I'm starting to see some new areas. This is clearly the dry side of the island, and it's a little desert out here. Luckily, this part is still above water. However, I can quickly see where the water is rushing in and filling in even more of the island. The island is flooding so quickly that I didn't even get to see these areas above water. That night, I get in my boat and start to head back home. I see my sad little wooden dam that I was hoping would hold back the water. As I head back home, I'm seeing there's still a couple areas on this island that are still well above water. I just don't know for how long. So even though it's still raining, and the water level's probably still rising, I do go to bed. On day 21, I have to shift my focus. I can't worry about the water too much. After all, up in these stilts, I should be safe, at least for a while. Now we can get to work on making this farm proper. That starts with the kenaf. This can be turned into string, which is super useful. In fact, it's so useful, I decided to throw some bones into the mill to get some quick bone meal. And while that's being ground up, I think it's finally time to add our blaze burner. Yeah, I kind of almost forgot about it. The flooding got me pretty distracted. I set that down, and pretty quickly, I start to smash up some more iron. With this, we can make a whisk. And with a whisk, we can make a mechanical mixer. Add this on top of a basin, on top of a blaze burner, and with just a few gears, we can get this set up and ready to make some brass. In order to make brass, all you have to do is throw in some copper, which we already have, and a little bit of zinc. Now, we just need to fuel the blaze burner, which takes anything that a normal furnace would. So we hit it with some coal, and pretty soon, we're mixing up our very first brass. A lot of the most advanced machines, including this farm that we want to create, require brass. So once you get this, you've truly unlocked a whole bunch of amazing machines. We take that bone meal to the kenaf and get a bunch of it grown up, and we get almost a stack, which we can use to make a ton of string, which we can use to make a ton of wool, which we can use to make a ton of sails, which should be perfect. In the meantime, speaking of making something perfect, we get brass, a whole lot of it. And now we can start to make some pretty cool tools. We'll start out basic. And I think what I'm going to do is make myself a kit. Brass armor is only a little step down from diamond. Plus, I just think it looks great. I'm truly the golden captain. Now let's get back to the sails. Using all this string that we managed to grow, we can now add a ton more sails. By putting more sails onto a windmill, it will then spin faster, but also produce more torque. This will allow us to add on even more machines. By going faster, it makes this fan blow much harder. I don't know if that's a good thing, but it also makes the mill spin faster and grind things up faster, as well as the mixer mix up more brass. The fact that the sail is clipping through these blocks, not so cool, but I'll deal with that later. The next day, I take what remains of my bone meal and head out to some open grass. Start hitting the ground, hoping that I can get some flowers. Specifically, we're looking for a red flower. Unfortunately, two things are happening. Number one is, well, we haven't found the red flower. I'm literally down to like 2 bone meal and haven't found it. The second thing is, our nutrition is looking super out of whack. We are completely out of protein. The bro inside of me is hurting. I'm really struggling to get this red flower, so I'm hoping I can find it somewhere else. Then I find this area, which has something amazing. A birch tree that actually looks kind of cool. That's like the rarest thing in Minecraft. And I gotta say, this little section right here would have been the best place to build. It has the highest elevation, a ton of open ground, and dirt where I could make my farm. It just has all these amazing trees. This is probably where I should have built. At least that's what I was thinking when I saw it. I wasn't too worried about it though. I was too happy when I found this. This is like the only poppy on the island, I swear. But now we have it. I take one last look at this desert, because in my heart, I kind of know in 10 days, all of this area I'm walking around will probably be underwater, just like this area I'm walking in right now. This is the beach. I walked by it one last time. I still cannot get over how crazy this is. This entire area is now underwater. Can't worry about that too much now, though. We get back to base and finally get to grind up that flour. It immediately gets us some red dye. We can then make some red wool, and now we can make ourselves a market. It's a good thing we found that emerald too, because now we're going to be able to make some purchases. I set this down right under the windmill, and I think he flies right through the blades. That's not so great, but that's okay. He's fine. I think these sails are also giving him a little haircut every time they go around, and he wasn't using his brains anyway. After all, the only thing I need him for is the deals, and he's giving us a pretty good one. For 5 brass, he's giving us 1 emerald. The first thing we're going to buy with those emeralds is an avocado tree. Now you're probably wondering, why do I need avocados? Well, to be totally honest, I just bought some avocados in real life, and the hunger brain was kind of bleeding over into the game, but I do actually have a legitimate reason to do it. Along with rice and cucumbers, I have a recipe that I've never done before that I should be getting ready to set off. We had some pineapple, then I grind up some bones to make a little bit of bone meal so I can help grow all those things. In the meantime, I set up yet another platform, and by the next morning, I almost have it finished. I make a little bridge to get over to it, and again, can I just say, how awesome are these bridges for real? Next, we start to set out all the platforms. And just like over on the farm platform, we set this a layer lower so that we can add dirt. Then we do. After cutting out some of these leaves, we finally plant down the avocado. I want to grow some trees over here, starting with this bad boy. Also, I add a little shortcut by making a bridge right from the avocado into my house. All the better to get these delicious things right into my mouth. And right away, we get a beautiful pamharvestcraft tree, looking pretty good. I also add this little staircase down to the water. Since I am going to be swimming around a lot, I better find some good ways to get up into my base. On the next day, we can finally start to use some of our brass. First, we craft up some mechanical harvesters, and then we, jump into the sea. Hope there are no sharks. I grab some pickles. The reason for this is when you put sea pickles in a millstone, you'll get lime dye. You can combine lime dye with the dough, which we already have being made, and you can make slime, which I gotta say, that's pretty amazing. Another advantage that comes with Create, after making just 1 iron sheet and 1 iron nugget, we can get super glue, a super important piece of a lot of machines, including our next one. We make a radial chassis, as well as a portable storage interface. This is the item that requires brass and is the core component of making the machine we're going to be making next. The next day, we head out to the farm, and I start to try to figure out how I'm going to set this up. First, we put down the radial chassis at the same level that we want everything to be harvested. I can't just slap down the windmill bearing. We're going to have to make a mechanical bearing first. Not too complicated, but very, very important. Once that's crafted up, we can now add that on top of the radial chassis. Only one problem. We need the sticky side with this green paste facing down. In order to do that, we're going to have to smash up some gold. 3 pieces to be exact. I guess 4 pieces. Anyway, while I might have fumbled that a little bit there, one thing I hope I don't fumble is the wrench. 1 stick, 1 cog, and then those 3 pieces of gold all smashed up. Perfect. And with this wrench, obviously, we can now turn the mechanical bearing facing down just like it needs to be. Now we can use our super glue on one of the sides of the radial chassis. We'll then add some blocks, and that'll be the arm of this machine. Then we add the windmill facing up, and now we just need 1 block. Any block will do. And on that block, of course, just like always, we'll start to build out the windmill. Still got a lot of work to do though. Now we have to glue one side of the arm and fill it with all of these harvesters. Unfortunately, we ran out, and the harvesters are weirdly kind of expensive. But we get a 4th one crafted up and added on the arm. Now we have to do a little work on the back side. So we use the glue so we can add a little bit of storage. We're putting 2 chests right here. Next up, and most importantly, we need the portable storage interfaces, those items that required brass. Those will help us actually get the items out of this farm. We have to make sure that they're facing each other. So we set them up like this. And we add a chute on top of another double chest. A chute kind of works like a hopper. We're getting close, but there's still some finessing we gotta get done. Before we get too in the weeds, is that a pun because of the wheat? Anyway, we need to test this out to make sure it's working. Sure enough, it's all spinning and looks good, and is harvesting some wheat up right away. That's the good news. The bad news is, as I look around, I can see that it actually has taken the chest with it. We're gonna have to adjust some things here so that this doesn't happen. By using the wrench on the radial chassis, you can shorten down the length of the arm. Now, hopefully it won't drag that chest or that log with it. And this time it's looking much, much better. And as it's starting to go around, I can see that it's missing the corners. However, this might be okay. I have another idea. And as the next day starts, I start to work on that idea by grabbing some avocados. With Pam's Harvestcraft, you can take any sapling, then add 8 of the same fruit to make a sapling of that fruit. I've decided that we're going to move our avocado trees so that they are part of this farm. That means we're going to have to cut an area down and put some dirt a little bit lower, but hopefully that shouldn't be too hard. I decide to do this in the very far corner. Then I put down the avocado tree. I also decide to surround this dirt block with some willow trapdoors, which I just think look kind of nice. And then after getting shot in the face, I finally managed to power grow this tree up. The good news is, it's perfect. It's at exactly the right height, so where the harvesters will actually harvest these avocados. The bad news is, it's kind of not planned very well, and there's only a couple avocados growing because the pineapples are actually in the way. I don't know if you can tell, but because I'm so malnourished, I only have like 8 hearts, even at full health, I'm kind of rushing here. I probably should slow down and actually try to figure this out correctly. I also decide I'm going to do a little reworking on the actual farm itself. Using carry-on, we move these chests back over here so that the arm is now 3 blocks longer. We smash up some iron, which we will then use to craft up some more harvesters. Then, with a little super glue, we attach those to the arm, making it 3 harvesters longer. This will be long enough so that it can reach out and collect all the crops, even in the very corner. I think. Maybe add 1 more harvester, just to be safe. At the start of the next day, I actually see that this is pretty brilliant. I didn't really mean to do this, but I've set this arm up so it's so long, now this farm will deliver food directly into my house. DoorDash has got nothing on me. One thing I can already see that doesn't work is this walkway. The arm will constantly be getting in the way, so we can't walk around our base. So I decide I'm going to make a new walkway. I now make a new path connecting to all the other platforms. And by day 27, I gotta say, this new platform is looking great. Now finally, let's actually test this farm out to make sure it's looking great too. I get the length set perfectly. Now all we have to do is start this thing up to see if it actually can reach all the way to the very end. Sure enough, it easily gets all the crops being grown in the ground. Now we just have to see, will it harvest all of the avocados growing on the tree? So once again, we're gonna have to harvest up some of these and make a new avocado sapling. We plant it, then quickly bone meal it up, then we start up the farm once again. I then jump on the arm and ride it as it goes around, and I see it just barely goes all the way around and snags every single avocado growing on this tree. Perfect. That means that everything growing in this farm will be automatically harvested. It won't be too useful though if there's nothing growing. So now we're going to replace all the crops, starting with rice and cucumbers as well. Now you get to see the entire purpose of what this farm really is for. There's a reason I picked these specific crops, because we're going to be making a California roll. I feel like it's the perfect food for a tropical vacation. We still need some more utilities, which means we need some more clay cooked into bricks, but soon we can make the cutting board, which means we can make our California roll. It is 15 shanks of food. It has veggies, carbs, and proteins. To be honest with you though, we're still lacking on the protein here a little bit, so let's go and fix that. Before the night's over, I use my last 2 emeralds to buy 2 eggs, and I get pretty lucky here. What are you guys kidding? It's the captain. I never get lucky. Of course I just wasted 2 emeralds. So with my pockets a little bit lighter, I'm free to go mining. I'm trying to farm up some more brass for emeralds when I find this little guy. This guy will give you an emerald for 32 cobble. Yeah, I guess it's a little bit of a cheat here, but come on, man. I gotta take advantage of this. Now, I have just enough emeralds for 1 item. I'd like to buy some nuts, but I think I should go with soybeans instead. Not my favorite crop, but an extremely useful one. I find some room on the farm, and I start to plant it. Then I grind up some bone meal, as well as grinding up my zinc. As soon as the bone meal is ready, we head over to the farm and start to bone meal up our soybeans. The soybeans are so valuable that once I fill this little 9-block plot, I actually decide to put even more soybeans and fill up another little plot. These will be extremely useful in helping us get our protein needs met. For example, we can use it to make tofu items. We also need kelp, however, if we want to make toe chicken. We just need a mixing bowl, a rolling pin, a saucepan, and a juicer to top it all off. I also decide I'm going to grow another avocado tree. These things take a really long time to grow. They're much slower than just like regular crops, so 2 of them means we might actually start to get a decent amount of avocados. And while I wait for that to grow, I do take a moment here to just admire my farm. You guys know me, I'm a big farmer boy, so seeing this amazing little farm right here with all the different crops and the trees all automated, I'm pretty happy about this, can't lie. Although I would be a lot happier if I could actually see it all pay off. In order to do that, we have to take the soybeans in a saucepan to make silken tofu. Next up, we have to make it into firm tofu with the rolling pin. Finally, we have to use a juicer with some more soybeans to make soy sauce. This is why we need so many soybeans. You actually have to use them twice for this one dish. All that, with some kelp, makes the raw tofu fish. And with that, we can make our California roll. And now I know this seems a little bit fake since it's not real fish, but I think that a real California roll actually uses like imitation crab. So if you think about it, it's all kind of fitting. What's not so fitting is the nutritional facts. It's way too many carbs and not quite enough protein, so we will have to supplement our protein in another way. However, not too worried about that. I'm way too busy being super proud of this amazing farm. Honestly, I could do 100 days where I just make farms like this. This thing is great. In addition, whenever I'm out, I'll just kill these lobsters. Now that the whole island is flooded, they're everywhere. The only problem really is kelp. I can also use kelp to make paper. That only makes it even more important though. We then need some leather to make a book. The good thing about this mod is we can also cook rotten flesh and make leather. I finally make that book, and then I cook it to make a cookbook, which I still think is hilarious. And the reason we're making this cookbook is because we need it in order to make a cooking table. Unfortunately, I think that requires 2 diamonds, so a little bit expensive, but this cooking table is totally worth it. This thing is amazing. It will take all the ingredients that are touching it, and you can use those to cook. You don't have to have them in your inventory. So now, we start to cook up a ton of terracotta blocks, and with that, we can make some kitchen cabinets. By filling up a kitchen counter with all the ingredients and cooking utensils that you need in Pam's Harvestcraft, you can go to the cooking table and cook anything you want without having it all sit in your inventory. So of course, we craft up another kitchen counter. And now we can fill all this up with a ton of ingredients so that we can get a ton of recipes. Well, except for this cooked lobster. We're gonna have to make an oven to cook things, but we'll get there later. For right now, I see that we can make eggs, which is strange, we don't have a chicken, and I see that eggs are made out of avocados, and they count as vegetables. Not so sure about that one, but I'll go with it. Apparently we can also make mayo out of avocados. This is getting weird, I don't know about this one. What I do know is I see this recipe right here that looks pretty good. Fairy bread. I've made this before, and I know that it has carbs, veggies, protein, and fruits. It's pretty amazing, so I decide I want to craft it up. All I need to do is make some bakeware. So I head out to get a little bit more clay, and I better hurry because day 30 is almost here. I throw this coal in the mill because if you do this, this can get you black dye, which is perfect. We can use that in our fairy bread, but also we can use it to make stained glass, which we can then use to make our oven. Once we have this crafted up, we put it right here in the kitchen, and now we should be able to cook things much more efficiently than if we had used a smoker. This allows you to cook 9 things at once. So of course we put our lobsters in there. We do need that protein. And speaking of baking in an oven, we decide to make our bakeware. With this, we're able to make our fairy bread. Now I can have a little midnight snack before I go to bed. Unfortunately, all these midnight snacks are starting to pile up. With no protein and all the carbs, we're starting to make a little bit of a dad bod here. I do see that stock is pure protein and veggies, but I do have to say, just sitting around and sipping raw stock, that is a pretty gym rat thing to do. I admit I'm a little bit desperate. Even though I don't want to use up the bone, I do craft up some stock, and then I cook it again in the bakeware to make dried soup. It's not great, but it'll have to do. Now that we have a little bit of our nutrition figured out, we head out to do some mining that night. Now we can find out just how good this brass pick is. We use it to immediately find some iron, which is great, then some zinc, and then right away, we managed to find some copper. Now we should be able to get brass, which means we should be able to get emeralds. Assuming we can survive, what's going to happen next? As I chow down on my delicious dried soup, I pop out at the very end of day 29. I'm getting attacked by skeletons. To be honest, they're the least of my concerns, as I'm pretty sure I can hear something happening over at this volcano. I'm afraid it might start to erupt. So I run back home to get well out of the blast radius. The good news is the water level isn't rising. Now we head to bed to see just what's in store for us on day 30. I look out to the volcano and everything looks okay. So I decide to head out there to see what the rumbling's all about. And luckily, the water level still looks about the same, so that's good. Then I see something really unusual. It's not lava, but water. Water is starting to erupt out of this volcano. Apparently, a massive hot springs has burst forth, and a geyser has started to spray water all over our tropical island. This is a little bit crazy, and it will definitely cause the sea level to slowly rise every single day, not just every 10 days, so that's a big problem. To be honest with you, this is even a bigger problem. In the back of my mind, I had always planned to make my base at the top of this volcano if everything else had flooded. Now that the top of the volcano is flooded too, that's completely ruined my plans. Now everywhere is flooded from the top to the bottom of this island. This is kind of crazy. I mean, look at this. There's literally water shooting out everywhere. I've never seen anything like this in Minecraft before, and if it weren't so horrible, it'd be pretty awesome. And as I go to the other side of the volcano, this little area where we also plan to put our base is, well, yeah, you guessed it. This area is now flooding too. In fact, there's so much water, it's actually starting to look like a river. All of this water is shooting down in a torrent. It is making a legit, massive flowing river. I mean, look at this thing. It genuinely looks like a huge river shooting out to the ocean. This is really bad. I know that this will start to raise the sea level very quickly. I even see that a little water is coming on this side too. It's flowing down, it fills up this little area and makes a pond, then flows down into this pond, almost like a real running river. I see it then flowing out into the ocean. This is really cool. I mean, it's horrible because I planned to build my base here, and now it's actually a riverbed. But still, seeing a running river in Minecraft, that's pretty wild. Well, now that we can see on day 30, everywhere around this volcano is now a complete wash. Like literally, we're not going to be able to build anywhere close to this volcano because it is all immediately flooding. Definitely not a good thing. However, one small piece of good news is that my base is completely untouched. The water level hasn't risen one bit over here, and that's good. At least this area is still dry. For now, we've survived another apocalyptic event. Now that I know I should be safe, I can get focused on getting all of these ores processed up again. It looks like I'm going to need everything I can get to try to stop whatever these events are going to be coming up. A thing that's going to help us is making this filter right here. This will help us automate the ore refining process. Inside of this filter, we can determine what will and what will not be able to go through it. I'm going to set this filter up on the basin. This way, it will smash up all of our nuggets into ingots, and it will not smash those ingots into blocks. That's a little annoying, and I don't love that. Pretty quickly, the press gets to work and makes us a ton of iron and copper ingots. Perfect. However, I think this could be a lot quicker. I stopped the windmill because now I think I'm going to add on to it. With all this kenef, we get a ton of string, which means we'll get a ton of wool, which means we can make a ton of sails. So, on the next day, and already things are going a lot faster. This is amazing, but I think we could do even better. I actually decided I'm going to take the entire windmill and raise it by about 2 blocks, just because I think it looks cool. Then I get the windmill bearings set up again. It's 2 blocks higher, and more importantly, I'm going to be adding about 3 levels more of sails. In addition, I'm going to make it much wider. I'm doing this because, one, it makes things go much, much faster, but also it no longer clips through those 2 presses. That was really making me annoyed there. This looks much, much cleaner. We can get back to processing up all of our goodies, starting with making some brass, as we throw all of our copper and zinc into the mixer. And with all these sails, the mixer is going quite a bit faster, and in no time at all, we get a full stack of brass. Perfect. Now we take a little visit over our capitalist friend here. We can sell all this brass for 12 emeralds. Not too bad. And while I could use all those emeralds to get eggs that will absolutely not turn into chickens, I decide maybe I should be a little smarter as I start to look up the nuts that give us protein. Eventually, I decide to buy some saplings. I get myself a walnut, as well as a hazelnut, and finally, I get the almond. I could get the pecan tree, but I actually decided to do something a little different and get a lime tree. I've never grown limes before, and they're really useful in a ton of different recipes. We set them all out in the four corners of this little platform, then bone meal them all up. And pretty soon, we have our own little mini orchard growing here up in the sky. I head to bed, and the next day, I see this place, and I gotta say, this is pretty amazing. Not only will we now have a renewable source of food that just keeps on growing, but now we have a good fix for our proteins that doesn't require any animals. Keeping animals alive on a flooding island might be a challenge. Growing these trees should be a little bit safer. That's my logic. That's what I was hoping, at least. Next up, we take some more macaw fences and get this entire area sealed in. That night, we take a couple of these custom gates. This entire pen is looking pretty good. And you guys probably already know what I'm gonna do with it. But let's get to that tomorrow. For right now, let's go to bed. So of course, we spend a fortune to get a bunch of eggs. And I go to throw them. But with my luck, I think we already know where this is going. And so I throw all 8 of my eggs and I get lucky. I mean, I actually get like ridiculously lucky. I get one of those eggs that has 4 chickens in it. Now I have everything I could hope for, except of course the kelp. I have a ton of raw ingredients, except the only thing stopping me from making California rolls is I have like 0 kelp. I could go around and gather a bunch of kelp. I mean, we are on an island, but that would just be a pain. And I feel like with the create mod, I could definitely do better than just a bunch of manual labor. So, we get started. I begin to make everything I need to make a windmill bearing. And pretty soon, I start to get the mechanical bearing as well, because now we're gonna get started on our very next machine. So, after making a radial chassis, of course we get back to the old bonk machine, praise be its name, and after bonking up a few iron sheets, at the very end of day 34, we can now make a couple more harvesters. In total, we managed to get 6. The last thing I'm gonna do, for style points, is make a little bit of steel. In Create Alloys, a little add-on mod for Create, you can make steel in the mixer with coal and iron. We throw those in, and pretty quickly we get our steel ingots. Not too bad. I decide to make a few into blocks, and then I use a stone cutter to cut those blocks into a sheet metal look that I really, really like. Now that we have 8 of these, and with everything else we've made, I'm actually pretty sure we might have everything we need to make this next machine. Before we go ahead and do that though, I do check on my trees, and I find that we have some hazelnuts ready to go. I grab some of these, and some walnuts as well, and then I throw them into the oven. Sure enough, they all cook all at once. Pretty soon, we get some roasted nuts, and now we should be good with all of our protein. At the start of the next day, now that I have a little bit of food, I decide I want to try something a little unusual. I head over to the volcano to see what it would be like to go mining inside of it. I go right up to the wall, and I start digging. And it turns out it was actually a pretty good idea, because right away we find some copper. This is exactly what we need to make a little bit more brass. I continue digging, and of course the inside of the volcano is extremely scary, and there's a ton of mobs, but pretty much saw that coming. In addition, there's a spawner in here, but I think it might be a spider spawner, which is just the worst. Good news is, there is a Silk Touch enchanted book. The bad news is, the inside of this volcano is quickly flooding. Water is now rushing into this ravine and filling it up. Now, I could just swim away and be safe. The thing is, I find this guy. He's willing to give us emeralds for cobblestone, so I have to stay and fight against drowning just to make a couple extra bucks here. The bad news is, while our wallets are filled up, our lungs are also filled up. With water though, not as good as emeralds. I quickly see that this entire ravine is flooded, pretty deep too. So I make my last few trades, get a ton of emeralds. I even managed to buy a sponge, which definitely could be useful later. But I think my welcome is a little bit worn out here. Time for us to get out of here before this entire thing floods. Good luck, little goblin. Hope you can hold your breath. We then pop our head out on day 36, and we start to get headed back home. I have to say though, every single time I go across this landscape, it always amazes me just how much it transforms right in front of my eyes. Literally, things are flooding every single day, and a whole new area has been filled up with water that wasn't just a few days ago. This island is really starting to flood super fast. I gotta be careful here. I head back to the area that we started, and it is way underwater. The water level might have risen a total of 6 blocks. This is kind of crazy. For now though, I'm just happy that I have a dry bed to put my head down on. I'm also pretty happy that our nutrition levels are actually looking pretty perfect. I do get a skillet, I think that's my last utensil, and with it, I can make arguably one of the best dishes I've ever had. Yeah, that's right, the grilled cheese. Now, I do not need fruits or carbs or anything like that, but once I see I can make grilled cheese, you can't stop me. Doesn't matter how unhealthy it is, I am absolutely making this. Next up, we start to spend the rest of today refining all of the stuff that we've been mining, including making even more brass. By the end of the day, we have a good collection of iron and brass as well. We can make an anvil, which is perfect, because now we can actually use that Silk Touch book. I decided to use it on pick, but before I run out and actually use it or do anything else, I decided it's probably safer to go to bed. At the start of day 38, we then head out. We're trying to find a new area under the sea where we can start to set up this brand new farm. I dig all the way down and put all of these supports. Then I set up our radial chassis. On top of that, we can then put our mechanical bearing and switch it so it's facing down. And then of course, we'll put our windmill bearing on top of that, just like we did with the other farm. The difference is this time I'm actually going to run a shaft all the way up into the air. I'm worried that the flooding might get even higher on day 40, so this windmill needs to be way up in the sky, way above any of the water. We do need a little extra wood to finish this whole thing off. We use it to make a ton of sails. Next, we head down just below the surface. And then on this entire arm, made completely out of steel blocks, of course, you know how I like it, we then start to add all the super glue and all of the harvesters. On the backside, once again, we are going to be adding some chests, and now we just have to set up the portable storage interfaces so they are working as well. Remember guys, you want to set it up so the two lips are facing each other and they give each other kisses. Next up, we set up this andesite funnel, and I'm realizing that all of this farm is going to be underwater, and I'm not 100% sure it's going to work. So I make this little area here with logs, and I try to get all of the water out. I try to make this little dry area that we can work with. I then start to set up some shafts, but before I can go any further, I have to make sure the farm itself is actually working. So let's go to bed for right now and get started on day 39. And the first thing I'm doing today is getting all of the sails set. I want to run this machine to make sure I did everything right before I proceed any further. I do a quick check here to make sure I actually did glue this all together, but I think everything is actually in place. So I get the windmill going, and sure enough, the arm looks like it's working. It's going in the correct direction, and pretty soon, this little funnel is spitting out kelp. Perfect. Now we have a farm that is slowly collecting kelp for us. The problem is it's way out here in the ocean. We have to figure out a way to transport all this kelp back to my base. And that is where all these shafts come into play. By cooking up kelp into dry kelp, you can use that to make conveyor belts. We use that conveyor belt diagonally, so when the kelp falls on it, it can be pulled up above the surface. That's a good start. We still have quite a long ways to go. Like literally, we have to go a long distance. So I spend the entire day, all the way into the night, laying out a bunch of conveyor belts, headed all the way back to my base. I decide to put some gears right here on the windmill shaft with a vertical gearbox and a whole bunch more shafts. I run these all the way back to the conveyor belts. And finally, by the next morning, we actually make some pretty good progress in that direction. We have all these shafts laid out, and pretty soon we get all these belts laid out in the correct order too. We now have two massive conveyor belts going all the way from the farm back to the house. Now we just have to get these powered. Unfortunately, I think if you put two cogs right next to each other, they actually turn inward, meaning that this setup right here actually makes the belts go the wrong way. So let's try to get power to the very first conveyor belt before I make any more decisions. I set this up, and sure enough, already no good. It's headed in the wrong direction. I put both these gears here and find out that this setup does in fact not work either. But that's not going to stop me. All I have to do is go one block down and put a shaft here instead. Now I can add one more cog, and instead of putting a cog in the middle, I then put 3 cogs a little bit further out. Now the belt goes in the right direction, pulling kelp up, then onto this belt where it pulls kelp even further down the line. I can do that exact same trick a little further, and the second belt is now running perfectly too. Now I just have to figure out how to get this last belt connected to the belt that takes everything up to our base, and get it all in the right direction. I put a gearbox down, and already I can see it's going in the right direction, so we can put a belt here. Now we just have to figure out how to get that very last diagonal belt going in the right direction too. And I do a little cheat here, and I use a conveyor belt to get that working. But pretty soon, I can already see that all the belts are slowly, very slowly, going in the right direction. They will then take kelp all the way up here and throw it into this chute. And this chute goes directly into my kitchen. I am having all of this delivered directly into my kitchen. You couldn't ask for a more convenient kelp farm. This is amazing, and I really love this thing. Is it slow? Yeah, sure, but then again, so am I, and I get the job done too. So I'm pretty happy with this setup. I have one little bit of California roll to celebrate, and give myself a pat on the back. Job well done. Now, I have my California roll, avocado, and pineapple, along with a few roasted nuts. I gotta say, it's a pretty good tropical buffet. This is some pretty good progress for not even being halfway done. My tropical little vacation is going pretty well. Yeah, it's a little soggy, and sometimes the flooding's been a little bit of trouble, but I've actually managed to stay ahead of it and make some pretty smart moves. I'm doing pretty good. I hope I didn't just jinx myself. But of course, my happiness is immediately dashed once again, because I see the water level has risen up to a level that is now insanely high. I look out to see the brand new belts that I just put out last night are already underwater. And in fact, the ocean level has come up to just below my house. If it went up even one block higher, I literally would have woken up underwater. I now see that my mine is completely flooded. Even the little barrier of logs I put out couldn't save it. It is now well underwater and probably useless, honestly. And I gotta say, it is very unnerving to be walking around my base where I used to be so high up in the air, not even worrying about it, to literally being on the water level, basically. I decide I'm gonna head out tonight to see just how bad the damage is. As I go away, I gotta say, this is concerning. Look at that. The water level is right there. It is right up to my base. If I don't do something, I'm worried that on day 50, a lot of this could be underwater. I'm already seeing that all of the little hills that used to be the top of the island, they're now underwater too. This area right here used to be 8 blocks above sea level, and now it has a layer of water sloshing above it. I now continue to look around. Of course, this crater is well underwater, but the entire beach where we started, it isn't even a beach anymore. This is officially underneath the ocean. There's just a few little blocks of sand sticking out here. This is ridiculous. I try to head out to do a little bit of mining that night, and even this is becoming difficult. With so much water everywhere, I have to be careful about all the areas underground that are flooding as well. But the water isn't my only problem. Obviously, I find some lava, but I also managed to find a good amount of iron, as well as some more zinc and even emeralds. Actually, a decent amount of emeralds. And after finding a little more copper, I drop in on this guy and get a ton more emeralds. Finally, with all my goodies and everything I've mined, I come back home on day 43. See, the water level is insane. Everywhere I look, the water has almost come up to the treetops. This is really bad. I think the water might have even risen a little bit more since I've been gone. To be honest with you, I actually stay up a little bit tonight. I'm collecting eggs and anything I might need to replant more trees or get more chickens. I'm genuinely worried that there might be more flooding. Also, I spend the night here grinding up all of our resources. I continue to make even more brass, so hopefully we can sell that for even more emeralds. And while this is extremely concerning, like there's a huge amount of tension on my shoulders, like at all times, there is some good news. With this kelp farm finally making a decent amount of kelp, we can dry it out and make kelp blocks. Then we can use those kelp blocks to fuel the oven, and then we can cook more kelp really efficiently, making more kelp blocks. Essentially, we have an infinite power source thanks to this kelp farm. In addition, I have a little bit more to be happy for. My nutrition is perfect. We are now 4 days away from the flood at day 40, and I think everything is leveled out. I think we might actually be okay. We get all of our brass and sell it all. With all of the emeralds we've collected in the past 44 days, we could buy any crops we need, just in case everything gets wiped out. But until that happens, let's keep pushing forward. I get myself some rose quartz with quartz and redstone, and I sand them down with a little bit of sandpaper. Then we just crush up some brass, and we can use that to make the hands and then make the deployer. Finally, on day 44, I make 3 deployers and I set them all up in a line. I try to get power to them, but yeah, a little overstressed here. I knew eventually this windmill would only be able to power so many machines, and we finally found out its limit. Luckily, I can detach about half the machines here, and it's just enough to let the deployers run. And if you're wondering, why did I set up 3 of these very suggestive looking pointy fingers? It's because we're going to be making a precision mechanism. That starts with 1 piece of gold being flattened out. Then we put that under a deployer that has a small cog. Then one with a large cog, and finally one with an iron nugget. You then repeat this exact process 4 more times. You need a total of 5 small cogs, 5 large cogs, and 5 iron nuggets, all in the correct sequence. Now, all of you who have a little bit of experience with Create know that I definitely went overboard here. You can do all of this with just one deployer. I definitely didn't need to make 3 of these deployers, and in the future, I probably won't. All the same, we get our precision mechanism. The reason we have this precision mechanism is to make a rotational speed controller. This is super convenient because it can help you speed up your machines without doing that whole small cog, large cog thing. Now, on day 45, we have 5 more days until whatever catastrophe happens. That should be plenty of time to make our next new contraption. I head up to the very last piece of dry land on this island, and I start to make a little bit of room. First, we set down a railroad, then a cart assembler along with a minecart. This is really important for making every contraption. On top of the sticky side of the cart assembler, we then add our rotational speed controller. And now we need to glue everything together. I'm not actually sure how much glue you need, but I always go a little overboard and just glue everything I possibly can. Starting with a large cog, then a vertical gearbox, and then finally gluing on that windmill bearing. Next up, onto the large cog, we can glue on this gear shift. This will be super helpful in controlling this contraption. Finally, at the very end, we glue on the rope pulley. This is the important part. Next, we set up this little platform made out of linear chassis. After we have this set up, by that night, we start to put some glue on the bottom of the chassis. Then, we glue on all of those mechanical drills. We head to bed, and a little bit of restful sleep gets our hearing back, which is nice. On day 46, we can head out and actually start this machine up. And right away, the whole machine starts to head down. The pulley will lower this entire system with all of these drills on it, which means that they will now go down and start to drill downward, mining up everything below them. Basically, what we've done is we've made ourselves a giant automated mechanical drill. I will admit we've made a slow automated mechanical drill, but that's what the speed controller is for. Now we can simply turn this up and very quickly speed the entire thing up. But first, we do have a problem here. We missed one drill right here, and because of that, the entire machine gets stopped. I managed to get that drill in place, and now this machine should work. This is where the gearbox comes in handy. We can put a lever on this, and we can control when this gets lowered. And with the speed increased, thanks to that speed controller, we now very, very quickly start to drill out a ton of blocks, as this thing starts to shoot down into the earth. I then hang out here all day, watching to see when the rope stops. Now that it has, I flip the switch, and the entire thing comes shooting back up, all automatically. I check inside these chests that are now full of all the resources that have been mined up. Now that's pretty cool. But obviously just having a miner in this one spot isn't that useful. It's definitely not worth all of this. This is where the cool part comes in. Because we put this on a cart assembly, we can now stop the windmill, flip the switch on the cart assembly, and if we use a wrench, we can now take the entire thing all at once, meaning that we now have a mobile, automated, massive drill. All we have to do is move to a new location, set down the rail, set down the cart assembly, and then set down the contraption. And it's that easy, and we can get mining all over again. I have to say, out of all the machines here, this one's probably my favorite, although this is only a small fraction of its true potential. We head back home, and we start to make even more linear chassis and even more drills. And I think you guys already know where I'm going with this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to expand the size of this drill and make it even larger, capable of getting even more resources. That night, we start to add on all the chassis, all the glue, and all the drills. By the start of day 47, I know that there's 3 days left, and I don't exactly know what's going to happen. I'm pretty afraid the water's going to start rising, but with this new drill, we don't have to worry about that as much. We don't have to worry about drowning as we mine by hand. The last thing that could possibly be a problem is if this whole thing isn't waterproof. So today, we're going to head out to an area that's already covered in water and set this up once again. Now let's send this thing down and see if it can drill through the new water. I'm afraid the water physics might mess things up, so this is definitely unknown territory for me. However, as it drills down, I can see that it seems to be working. And as it drills down and takes out chunks of blocks, I can actually see the water rushing in to fill the gap, and that is pretty cool. And by that night, it's gotten all the way to the bottom. And already, I'm seeing some pretty bad news. The drill isn't rising up. It's stuck down underneath the ground. Maybe this machine can't mine through the water. This could be a huge problem. This is all underwater. I don't know if I'm going to be able to save this. I head down, and hopefully I can figure out some way to get this thing unstuck. As I dive down and start to dig around the sunken drill, everywhere I dig starts to flood with water, and I'm quickly starting to drown. The good news is I found the problem. There's glue on the side here, which makes it stick once it gets down here. I can remove it, and get a little bit of air so that now I can go all the way back up to the surface, and hopefully this should be free. Once we're up here at night, I flip the switch and there we go. The rope is now moving, which means I solved the problem, and in no time at all, this thing comes right back to the surface. I check inside the chest to see that we have successfully got a little bit of iron and redstone and some other goodies too. However, I can't help but notice that the vast majority of everything in here is, well, to be a little bit rude here, garbage. I don't need all this cobblestone, that's for sure. Now, we can pack this up, and I'm pretty sure I have the process down. Step 1 is we stop the windmill. Step 2 is we put a lever on the side of the cart assembler. Step 3, maybe step 2.5 is we switch the lever. We use the wrench on the cart, and we can remove this all at once. We then head to a new location, unpack it, turn on the windmill, and flip the switch. And now, while this is drilling, let's head to bed. We can check on it in the morning. At the start of day 48, we head out to see the progress, which is good, but what's a little upsetting is I see there's a ton of copper right over there that we missed. I might have to move the drill so that we can go and get all that. I'm not leaving that behind. Pretty soon, the rope stops, which means now it's time to pull everything up, and soon everything comes up to the top, and we get a decent amount of loot. However, I think we can do better. That night, I head out to start chopping down some trees. The reason for this is to make andesite casing, which we can use to make even more drills. However, we're going to have to make linear chassis as well, which means we're going to have to collect some more materials. So we're going to do more drilling to get more materials to make the drill bigger, so that we can get more materials to make the drill bigger. You know, classic Minecraft stuff. Then we have some classic Captain stuff, which is somehow, after messing around with the speed here, I accidentally got some kind of glitch to happen, and I think this thing is broken. It's stuck down there again, so I have to jump to my death. Nah, just kidding. I head down here, splash down in the water, and try to figure out what's got this stuck this time. I weirdly see that there's like an entire layer of stone on top. That's not normal. But what is normal is me almost drowning myself. Now I just barely managed to dig myself a little oxygen hole. And luckily the water physics aren't too realistic, and you actually get some air to breathe here. After waiting a bit to heal, I start to break down this cobblestone. But I realize that that's the least of our problems. Lava has spilt onto the drill and turned into obsidian. That means now we have to drill out this obsidian while we're underwater. Eventually I set myself up so I'm actually touching the ground and mine a little bit quicker. This is still a huge nightmare and takes basically all day, but I think we finally freed this thing. So by that night we head up, and sure enough, this might be the best thing I've done so far. I fought so hard to get this up. And as the next morning starts, we finally get this drill to come above the surface. That was really a pain in the butt. I set down the lever, but some water actually washes the lever away. That will become super important in the future. Remember that one, guys, I promise you. For now, it doesn't matter too much, because we can brush the water aside and quickly pick this thing up. We can move it again and continue mining in a brand new area. I've moved it so that it will actually go and grab all that copper that I saw earlier. But most importantly, we're getting a ton of andesite, and therefore we can expand this to be an even bigger automated drill. I was having a ton of fun using this drill over and over again, and I was focused really heavily on trying to expand it and making it even bigger. And in doing all this drilling, I had lost track of time. I didn't realize that it was already day 49, and day 50 was just a couple minutes away. I head back home, and I start to use all that andesite to make some andesite alloy. And just like I promised, I'm going to be using this to make more linear chassis, which I quickly add onto the drill. And pretty quickly, I think I managed to double this. Then we glue on all of our drills, and in no time, we have a pretty decent-sized platform. Very quickly and very loudly, I will admit, drilling down into the earth. And then I realize it. As beautiful as this paradise sunset is, it is the sun setting on day 49. Tomorrow, we might get hit by something pretty catastrophic. To be totally honest with you though, I wasn't really panicking. As you guys can probably tell, I had a plan. I levered up my brand new toy and took it away as I went to go look for our next dig site. I swam all the way out to the other side of the island. And I have to admit, it was pretty daunting to see this. This beach right here that used to be well above water is now about 4 blocks underwater. It's pretty deep down there. I'm gonna head over to this mountaintop. This is the volcano that doesn't have the geyser shooting out of it. That night, I spend climbing up to the top. I'll admit it's a little bit tricky, but nothing too dangerous. My plan is that I'm going to move everything, my entire base, over here. And while I am excited to start to look for a cool new area amongst these magma blocks and basalt blocks, I have to admit, the American inside me gets the better of me, and I immediately start fracking for resources. Start to go right down into the top of the volcano. And it does take a long time. I mean, it does have to go down almost 150 blocks. And so, because of that, the sun is already starting to come up on day 50, the halfway mark of our playthrough. Sure, the water level is rising, like 5 blocks every 10 days, but it would take maybe 500 days for the water level to get this high. So I have nothing to worry about. I mean, unless, like, the lava starts to rise. And that is a lot of lava down there, actually. Uh-oh. I just barely managed to recover my drill as lava comes pouring out the top of the volcano and spills all over the island. That's right, the volcano has officially erupted, and the realistic water physics have become realistic lava physics, as hundreds of thousands of gallons of lava spill out all over the island. They quickly go from lava streams to lava lakes to what almost looks like a lava ocean. So much lava has spilt out and turned into cobble. As it's hit the ocean, it's now begun to create even more land. It's essentially blanketed over the water. As cool as this is, and I seriously think this is amazing, I can see how dangerous this is also going to be. I jump on a boat and then I see this river of lava pouring down from where I just came. It literally chased me down the mountain, and it looks like it's still chasing me, as the lava is pouring and hitting the water and immediately turning into cobble. It is rapidly expanding the size of the whole entire island. Now the raging ocean is now become a raging ocean of lava. I couldn't help myself though. I mean, look at this. Look at how amazing this is. Not only is the water rising, and it has completely engulfed this island. This tiny little cherrywood island is now almost entirely underwater. It's also almost on fire. The lava came right up to it, and it is still expanding. In the past few minutes that I've been looking around, the lava has quickly gotten further and further. It's even expanded and blocked me off from that little crafting table I just made about a minute ago. I continue to look around the island, and I see that it is not just that tiny little river of lava coming down that one side of the mountain. There's lava spilling everywhere. It's now completely engulfed this tiny little island here. There's a little path of water here I just managed to boat my way into. I get up here and I get to see just how crazy this is getting. There are literally waves of lava spilling, and I see that the entire volcano has blown its top. It is spilling lava in every direction. This is one of the craziest things I have ever seen in Minecraft ever. This is unbelievable, and it's only just beginning. As I go from a burnt out forest to a vast ocean of lava that's even beyond my render distance. I mean, it is lava as far as the eye can see. Just as the sun is starting to set on day 50, my worst fears realized. The lava is actually starting to spill up on the land. Now, it's not just covering the ocean, it's in fact covering some of the ground. This lava right here used to be water. There used to be a fresh little pond here, and now it has more lava than the Nether. And that's when I realized it. I think I'm in trouble here. I look back to see that my entire path has been completely covered. I have to run and jump over the lava just to escape. I gotta be honest, I almost let that one get away from me. I was trying to look around and see how bad it was getting, and I didn't realize I got surrounded by the flowing lava. Luckily I got away though, and I get to see that view right there. There is literally a mountain of liquid lava pouring towards us. That is the craziest thing I've seen. As the night falls, I can see it even more clearly, glowing against the darkness, just how insane this sight really is. Look at that. I gotta be careful here. This is really beautiful. I mean, it's quite literally entrancing, but I gotta keep my wits about me, or else this little brass armor is not gonna protect me. I now see another area where there's some trees. I think I remember this from a few days ago. I jump up to see it, and then I see that the lava is now spilling out and covering this entire area. This area was originally flooded by water. Now it's being flooded by lava. The lava has literally poured down the side of the mountain and is moving like a river of lava down the sides of the island. It is making its way all the way out to the ocean and still flowing and spreading even further. Once again, I've gotten myself in a dangerous little spot here, and I have to quickly get out of here. I could only be there for a few seconds. I then run over to the little desert area here. This is almost 200 blocks away from the volcano. I'm thinking I'm safe here. I'm now looking at the lava that has completely filled in this entire basin. I look around to see that now the lava is getting so high that it's starting to climb up. It's now covering up the sand and is actually coming towards me. I then look up to see just how bad it is. This entire side of the mountain has melted away and is rushing down towards me. This is insane. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this in Minecraft, not even close. As the next day starts and the lava continues to flow, even if I were to die right here, I would still have uploaded this video. Like seriously, this is such a crazy view. This makes the entire 100 days worth it by far. This poor little seal is unfortunately a victim of this giant eruption. He is now way too far away from the water to get there safely. It's up to me. So I grab him, and luckily with carry-on, I actually can pick him up, and I manage to set him down. And quickly he finds his way to the ocean, and he's safe. And it wasn't too soon, too. This lava is still expanding, still flowing out, and still getting even further out into the ocean. I get on a boat, and I decide I'm not playing around anymore. It's time to get out of here. I have to get back to my base. This is spread so far, I'm not even sure I'm safe. As I start to head home, though, I see that there's only a little bit of lava right here. There's no longer any lava to the right of me. I head back over to this beach that has been completely covered in water to find that there's no lava here either. Luckily, the volcanic peak that exploded with water and had a geyser is the one closer to me. So as I get back to my base, I realize that I'm safe from the lava, and I built in the right area. Turns out it was a good thing I didn't go build over there. A really good thing. Although, maybe I'm not that lucky after all. I look around and I swear the water level has risen. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it's risen almost an entire block. I think that the lava caused the water to actually rise up a little bit. At least it wasn't anything too crazy. We still have some dry toesies and continue on with our industry, which involves making our ore doubling system a little more efficient. I take the millstone and I raise it up one block, and then I attach a funnel to it, so that anytime we throw ores into the millstone, they'll automatically be emptied down into the path here where they'll be washed and turned into nuggets. By the end of the day, I have this nice little setup here so we can easily chuck a bunch of ores right on top of it. But it has one fatal flaw. An andesite funnel like this is super slow and inefficient. I wasn't too worried about it, but now I'm realizing if these drop one at a time, some of the ores might actually start to despawn. Place the brass funnel, and then we set up the filter, so it will not allow any of the crushed ores to go in, making sure they're washed into nuggets first. Feels like a day well spent, so I head to bed. Day 52, I head out, and I am convinced that the water level is a little bit higher, maybe half a block. It still hasn't washed up into the house, so it's not anything to fret about, at least not yet. However, if there's any more flooding, we could be in real trouble here. I decide I want to head out to do some more mining, but this time I'm going to do something a little different, as I head out to do some mining near the first volcano. And two things are happening right away. The first thing I notice is that this volcano is no longer spewing water, which is good because it means the water level won't be steadily rising. The second thing I notice is after setting this up and drilling, we might actually have a little trick here. Maybe we can drain some of the water into these giant holes and slowly lower the water level. At least that's the plan. To be honest with you, I was just happy to have this massive drill finally working and to not be surrounded by lava. I was also pretty happy to see this little guy. Turns out our little seal friend made it out alive too and joined us on this side of the island. He says he doesn't like bread. He was hoping more for a Nacho Supreme from Taco Bell, and yeah, I don't blame him on that one. With all these attached chests, we can move this over to a new area. Although I can't help but notice just how annoying it is to have to manually throw out all of this extra junk every time I go drilling. I'm definitely going to try to figure out a solution for that in the future. For now, I'm too preoccupied spending the next few days doing a ton of drilling and collecting a ton of resources. I head back home, and at the start of the next day, I decide, speaking of Taco Bell, I'm going to get myself a brand new crop, as I use some of the emeralds to buy a corn seed. Technically, I think this should just be a kernel, but oh well, I'm not going to ask too many questions. I'm too busy planting this corn seed in our farm. I get a little bit of bone meal and grow up the corn to fill out the 9-block area of the farm. With a good amount of corn, we can now start to make our next recipe. Yes, that's right. We're going for a quesadilla. Quesadillas are one of Captain's favorite foods. The fact that we don't have real cheese and we're going to have to use tofu cheese, a little less ideal. But let's be honest, we're on a volcanic sinking island. I can't be too picky. And while I'm trying to maintain a nutritious diet, at the very last minute, I cave. I see that we got some cheesy poofs. Cartman would be proud. What's weird is these are actually the perfect thing we need to round out our nutritional diet. After a long day of mining, I do decide to enjoy a delicious cheesy poof dinner, but unfortunately it has too much protein. Can confirm, bodybuilders don't need steroids, all you need is some cheesy poofs. That night, I continue doing even more mining. Unfortunately, all these cheesy poofs have made me a little plus size, so jumping up on top of this platform is becoming a little difficult. I glue some stairs onto the machine so that I can easily walk up and down. I just spend the next few days mining, getting a few resources, like diamonds, and everything I would need to continue to make this platform even bigger. However, the cheesy poofs are starting to make my heart itch a little bit, so eventually I do decide to make those quesadillas. I decide to use some bananas and some pineapples in a blender and make some fruit juice. I think I'm gonna dip my cheesy poofs in the fruit juice. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, what definitely doesn't sound good is having all of this cobblestone. It is becoming a little frustrating. Every time I'm mining, I have to empty out all these chests of all this cobblestone. I'm trying to think. Create is so useful. It could probably help me somehow to automate this process. I just have to figure out how. By the next day, of course, I head out to do even more mining. I'm almost to the point where I have enough andesite to continue to add on to this. I do set out the drill in a brand new area, and I send it down. Now I'm gonna head back home and finally use all this andesite we've been collecting. With all of this andesite alloy and all the logs we were collecting last night, we can finally add on in a significant way and increase the size of our drill. We make a ton of linear chassis, like a lot, like literally more than 2 stacks. Then we make some drills. Unfortunately, we do not make as many drills as we do linear chassis. I might have gotten carried away there, but it's all right. All we got to do is just a little bit more mining to get a little bit more andesite. However, I do decide to take the drill and finally move it back over to this side of the island. That night, I keep on making more andesite alloy, more andesite casing, and eventually use all of it to make more of the drills. Now we have a full stack. This is much, much better, but we're still not quite there. I've been working for the past few days. It's already day 57. However, in the dark, I can't really see anything, and I wouldn't want to mess this up. I go to bed, but on the next day, I'm going to get started. I get a little bit more wood and start to dig out some space so that I can start to add on all of these linear chassis. And I gotta say, by the time I'm done, it is pretty impressive. I think we've doubled the size of this once again. Maybe even more than doubled this whole thing. In fact, maybe we've even tripled the size of this thing. And of course, I have the perfect amount of linear chassis. Yeah, totally planned. Then we start gluing on all of the drills. And I gotta say, it does take a little while here, but when we're done, it is well worth it. Unfortunately, unlike the linear chassis, I have an extra 18 drills, so I do decide to get just a few more linear chassis, and by that night, we add the 18 drills. Now this thing should be ready. We head to bed, and by day 58, we should get to test this massive new drill. And in the daylight, I do see that this is actually pretty impressive. I mean, the scale of this thing alone is pretty awesome. I flip the switch, and sure enough, this whole entire thing starts to shoot down in the ground. I think this thing might almost be 4 chunks big, and is taking a giant chunk out of the island. It is literally cutting the top of the island in half, and water is pouring in from both sides. This is really cool, don't get me wrong, but this might actually be a bad idea. I mean, the island's already sinking on its own. Now I'm taking a giant chunk out of it. But at this point, I was pretty addicted. I was having way too much fun. I wasn't going to stop no matter how bad of an idea this was. I knew this drill was much, much bigger and was going to cut out way more blocks. So I added a ton, and I mean a ton of storage. And sure enough, all the chests were full. Only there wasn't a bunch of good stuff. Some of these chests are just pure cobblestone, which is just simply disgusting and below me. Now it's day 59. I know there's probably some event coming. Like, maybe an asteroid's gonna hit us, or a giant whale's gonna swallow the whole island. At this point, I don't really care. I'm having way too much fun with my brand new toy. But I'm starting to get an idea. I might have a system here that might help me flush out all this cobblestone. Assuming I survive day 60, that is. At the end of day 59, I set the drill up once again in a brand new area. This time, it's very, very close to our base. I set it down, turn the windmill on, then I flip the lever. It starts drilling, and the first thing it destroys is my frames. Yeah, it turns out when you have this many moving parts that are destroying that many blocks all at once, no matter how good your computer is, you're going to be frying some CPUs. To be honest though, I'm not even mad about it. I mean, literally look at how much of the water physics have to render here. We've basically made a hole in the ocean. There's a giant sinkhole now where the ocean is flooding into the middle of this island. When I told you guys this island was sinking, I bet you didn't think that I would be the one sinking it. The water levels around our base and around our little swamp are actually starting to go down. We're literally draining the swamp right now. I flip the switch to bring it back up, and sure enough, I see chests full of a ton of good stuff, but unfortunately, full of a bunch of cobblestone as well. I move the drill one more time into this location, and I send it down mining once again. It's now the end of day 60, and no big event has happened. I'm kind of thinking that maybe we escaped it. Maybe the water level raised a little bit, but with all the draining we've been doing, maybe we haven't even noticed. Either way, I'm not too concerned at this point. After all, back at home, my little house and my lab are dry and totally fine. I spend the rest of day 60 processing up all of the ores that we've been mining with this giant drill. I'm kind of just hanging out here watching and waiting to see if anything happens. I think the coast is pretty clear, no pun intended, and I decide to go to bed to get to day 61. Next, I decide to craft up some more sails. I mean, like a lot of sails. Then I get hit in the face by this sail, which I'm not a huge fan of. I am a huge fan of this crafting table, and I decide to glue it onto the entire platform. Next, we decide to break out some of these sails. I'm also going to break out the windmill bearing because I'm going to be setting this up a little bit higher. We start to add a few shafts and we glue them all together. Again, I don't know if this is all super necessary, but just being extra careful. We end up setting the windmill bearing about 3 blocks higher and start to put back all the sails. Then we add all the sails that we just crafted up. Unfortunately, by the time we run out of sails, the whole entire thing is completely unbalanced. It's looking kind of goofy. So we are going to have to go back and craft some more. By that night, we managed to get ourselves a pretty big windmill, and it's going pretty fast. This is good. We're going to need this because we're going to be adding a ton more machines. Starting with a lot of our mechanical belts. And yes, I mean a lot. What we're going to do is we're going to connect all of these belts to the same system being powered by this windmill. Unfortunately, I have to figure out how to separate the mechanism that lowers the platform and starts all the drilling, and the mechanism that I want to add right now with all the belts. So I'm going to try to use a clutch. If we put this clutch on the same line connected by shafts, it will then still be getting power from the windmill. However, if I put a lever on the clutch, I should be able to turn it on and off. Before I get started with that though, I have to get everything else set up. I then run the shaft all the way out here to this line of super glue that I've made. I then add one shaft over on this side and another shaft all the way on the opposite side, which, you guessed it, I connect with one large mechanical belt. Perfect. Now this belt is running all the way down the length of the entire platform. Then I can use this switch. I can turn the belt off, but I can still have the windmill running, which means we can still run the drills. Now the drills and the belts are running separately. Perfect start. The next part is that we get rid of all the chests, but not permanently. In their place, I'm going to add some more linear chassis, then glue, then we're going to put the chests on top of this. Basically, we're just raising up these chests by 1 block, and they're still connected to the platform, so they still should fill up with all the resources that the drills collect. I'm hoping. We're going to continue this process on both sides of the platform. In total, I think we have about 12 large chests, which should be plenty of storage. Then, on all the chests, we add our funnels. These will start to dump out everything that collects in the chests. However, once again, my internal scaredy cat gets the better of me, and I decide it's probably best to play this safe. I put glue in between every chest and every funnel, just to make sure that it all sticks together. I start to add glue in front of all the funnels. Hopefully, now everything else will stick. I mean, should. I literally covered the entire platform with glue. This should work. What we're going to do now is we're going to connect a shaft to this long primary belt. Then we're going to be putting a ton of shafts all underneath the chests. And of course, once again, we do this on both sides. And of course, once again, I use a ton of glue, probably more than I need. Finally, I set this gearbox down so that hopefully all of these shafts will all be connected and all will be rotating. Now I'm going through and I'm setting up all these shafts, carefully trying to make sure that when I put belts on these shafts, they'll all be connected to all of the funnels and all running in the right direction. I think I'm doing a good job here, but in truth, I can't really tell until the whole thing is running. Pretty soon after I start to set out some of the belts, I see that everything is working. The main idea here is that the belts will go from this direction down the side, collecting everything that falls out of these chests. It will go over on this tinier belt, then onto this belt all the way back. It will go onto the longest belt then and run down the entire length of the platform. I can even demonstrate it by being a human guinea pig. I jump on the belts, and very quickly, it shuffles me all the way around, just exactly the way I wanted it. I then do this on the other side as well. Now, every single chest on this contraption has a funnel, all of which is emptying out onto this belt, all connected and heading off into this one direction. Then I start to set up all the funnels so that they are facing the right direction and actually going out, and soon I see all my hard work is paying off. Now, any cobblestone that's in these chests is thrown onto this belt. The main belt then throws everything off the side and into the ocean. And while it seems like this is working pretty well, we do of course have one last test. We turn off the windmill, we flip this lever, because I want to make sure that this whole contraption is still working. I will admit there was a little moment of panic there as I thought everything was broken, and once I actually managed to pick this all up, I'm not too relieved, because it turns out my fears were confirmed. I didn't glue everything down. I put the contraption back in place. There's a couple of things, like a few shafts and a gearbox that weren't glued down. I head over here and quickly managed to fix everything. Luckily, I didn't mess anything up too bad. Now that I think I've got everything done, let's try this one last time. I have to set the whole thing down to see if it actually works. I start up the windmill, then I see that the lever has already been stopped, so the belts aren't running. That's perfect, that's the way I want it. Then I throw the first switch so that we'll start to do some more mining. Sure enough, it looks like everything is working perfectly. So after this collects some stuff in these chests, I flip the switch, and this whole thing comes right back to the surface. Perfect. What's not so good is these poor little fish. Yeah, I really didn't mean to do this. I kind of feel bad right here, no lie. I did try to save them, I swear. I tried to save them by punching them, and they fell on the floor, but still, I tried. As upsetting as that is, it turns out that this device is actually working. Because now, even though the windmill is going, and I can lower and start the drill whenever I want, the clutch is turned off, which means the belt isn't running, which is perfect. Now all these chests are full of cobble, but they're also full of valuable loot. So what we have to do now is go through the chests and pick out everything that we want. Finally, we throw the lever, and everything that we didn't want to take out of those chests now gets thrown out into the ocean. This will be a huge time saver. I don't have to load my inventory up with cobblestone and sand and dirt, then go over to the side of the platform, throw it off, and then come back and empty a bunch of these chests. With a flick of one lever, I can now get rid of everything that I don't need. Unfortunately, andesite funnels can only empty out one item at a time. So as you can see, this is very, very slowly trickling out. It's not exactly optimal. By the time I get back to the digger, I see one, it's still emptying out cobblestone, that's no good. But two, I see the sombrero. Yeah, that's right, only the best item in the game. So of course I head back to base. I then craft up everything I need to make a ton of brass funnels. But more importantly, I make sure to grab a few emeralds, so when I come back to the digger, I can secure the most important item in the game. And I have to say, with my quesadillas, this beautiful tropical paradise, and my sombrero, I'm really feeling at ease. Even with the volcano and the constant flooding, none of that beats my sombrero vibes. Unfortunately, I do have to get back to business, as I go around replacing every funnel with a brass funnel. The brass funnel can empty out an entire stack at a time, not just one cobblestone at a time. So obviously, it can empty out all the extra scrap much quicker. And while I love this little upgrade, and I think it's going to make my life using this driller much easier, I think we can take this a step further. Unfortunately, to get that plan working, we're going to have to make some mechanical crafters. And sadly, mechanical crafters need a ton of rose quartz, and we're out of quartz. We're going to have to head to the Nether. Ironically, to get to this lava-y Nether, we have to actually go through a flooded cave. And yes, I kind of forgot that this whole entire mineshaft was flooded. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt. On top of that, it's nighttime, so it's kind of difficult to find my way around. Eventually, though, I do find the mineshaft. Unfortunately, the second I open the door, the water floods in and breaks the portal. I don't actually think this would have happened in vanilla. I think the water physics make the water go through the door. Yet again, another challenge of water physics. But don't worry, it has its upsides as well, because now I can actually move the water by digging a little path where everything can drain out. It takes a little bit of work and almost drowning, but I do manage to make this system here where if I jump into this hole and pop my head out, the water will not flood into this room. In addition, I managed to fully drain all the water out of here and rebuild everything I need to walk right into the portal. Now I just have to get the flint and steel and light this thing up again. Sure enough, this little airlock breathing hole works perfectly. I get in here, light up the portal. Now let's go get some quartz. The good news is, this time we do not have to run around for 3 days trying to find a fortress. The second I get in here, I see some quartz, and I don't need too much. So I very quickly grab it and then head right back to the surface. And I get back to the top to realize it's the very beginning of day 64. I craft up a ton of rose quartz, and I quickly get some sandpaper and start to shave it all down. I head back to my miner and start to raise it up. I hope little Moby right here is okay. Come on, buddy, run. Go, 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 go. Woo, okay. Yeah, I wasn't nervous there. I knew he was going to be safe the whole time. Totally, promise. Unfortunately, as happy as I am to see Moby okay, I'm not too happy to see all of my resources thrown into the ocean. For whatever reason, the belt system started up before I could empty out all the valuable resources, throwing out all the cobble and all the valuable stuff that I would have wanted. See, what happened was, whenever I lower this, if it stops underwater, the water washes away the lever. This means that if I drill down into water, which, let's be honest, in a flooding island is pretty much everywhere, this entire digger will empty out all of its contents when it comes to the surface. Not exactly ideal. I test this out one last time. I set the lever on the side, then drop it down into the water. However, because it didn't stop down there, the lever is still in place. So I do one last test and send this all the way down to the bottom. Then, unfortunately, the lever is destroyed. And when this does come back to the surface, I do get confirmation that that is in fact the problem. I'm sure that my smart viewers out there could get in the comments and find a more permanent solution here. As for me, all I'm going to do is break out this clutch, and I'm going to leave a gap in the shaft so that every time I want to turn this on, I just have to add a shaft here. Yes, it's a little bit booty cheeks, but it's the best I can do for right now. And so, one more time, we're going to test this out. I'm going to set this down right here in a brand new area where we can start mining. And hopefully, even if it drills down and fills up with water, the belts shouldn't be throwing all the valuable stuff out into the ocean. Turn on the windmill, then I honestly have to fight through all these logs, but eventually I do manage to turn the machine on, and it starts to dig. Yes, it completely wrecks my frames and the world. It tore up this tree, and I think it's tearing up my computer, but it is working. While that's digging, let's go focus on something else. Now we're going to start to use all that quartz we collected down in the Nether, as we're going to be making these mechanical crafters. At the beginning of day 65, we start to smash up some brass so that we can make some brass casing, so that we can make those crafters. Unfortunately, we do need some wood. So I head back out to get some when I see that this giant hole is in fact filling up with water. It's created this huge waterfall, and I have to say, I am more and more impressed with water physics every day. This is such a cool mod. I don't understand why more YouTubers don't use this. Either way, with a little bit more wood, we can start to craft up a few of these mechanical crafters. We get 18, but I think in total we'll need something like 21. So we keep on working at this until we get that. Perfect. Now we just have to set it up on a power source so that we can actually use it. I start to head over to my platform, and very close to the windmill, I start to set up these mechanical crafters. However, I'm realizing that the space is getting pretty tight here, and I'm not 100% sure this is going to work out too great. So I think we're going to have to place these mechanical crafters somewhere else. So while I'm trying to think about where I might place that, let's go check on the rig. I send it up, and very quickly it starts to ascend. But I'm starting to realize that all these trees are in the way. Maybe this is a bad idea. I decide to send it back down, and then clear out some of the trees so that when it comes up, I can actually walk around up here. I start to realize that the reason these trees stuck is because I have so much glue just thrown out everywhere that a lot of these trunks are actually getting stuck to the platform like this. Yeah, a little bit silly, I'll admit. Once I get all the trees out of the way, this little lobster right here reminds me not to connect the shafts just yet. Thank you, by the way. First, we have to go around into each chest and check them all to see what we want to collect and what we want to get rid of. Now, we finally get to try this system out for real. I've emptied out everything that I want, and then I put the shaft in place. Now, everything is being thrown off the platform, and it turns out this works exactly the way I want it. And in no time at all the chests have been emptied, and I don't have to run around and do all this by hand. Then, to stop the whole thing, so we can start mining again, all I have to do is break down this shaft. I gotta say, this is actually kind of funny. We've drilled so much earth out of the way that the water has actually started to fill up these giant holes, and this whole entire swamp has started to drain. The water level for the first time in this playthrough is actually starting to go down. Could I make it my mission for the last half of this video to actually save this island? Can we take out so much of the ground that the water level recedes and we can actually get this island back above sea level? Of course, in order to do that, we're going to need a lot of resources. So I start to take everything that we've been collecting and throw it up here to start to get processed. Step 1 of doing that is turning that andesite funnel into a brass funnel. Now entire stacks of the crushed ore will start to fall out of that millstone so it won't process so slowly. The next step in upgrading the system is adding a chest up here with a brass filter as well. In this chest, we can leave all of our ores so they don't despawn. The brass filter will only spit out ores if there's nothing below it, meaning that ores will only get spit out if it's time to get a whole new batch processed. Essentially, we won't have to worry about any of the ores sitting out here for too long and despawning. And now that that's been dealt with, we can continue to move on and figure out what we're going to do with these mechanical crafters. I decide I haven't worked on my base in a while, so there's no problem here expanding a little bit and creating another little platform to build on. By the end of that day, we have a brand new platform set up, and I even connect it with our little bridges. Now we just have to fill it out with some slabs, which shouldn't be too hard. And now that we have a little more room, we can start to set out these crafters. All I have to do now is figure out where should I set these down, so that it'd be the easiest to connect them to the power system. I just decide to put them over here in the corner. The pattern is pretty simple. It's 3 by 5 by 5 by 5 with 3 on the top, just like this. By the next day, we finally have some cogs set up that lead right to the mechanical crafters. Good news! Bad news is it is super overstressed. I stopped the windmill because I think that we're going to go with the old reliable strategy, which is just adding more sails. I don't know if we fully maxed out this windmill yet, but if we haven't, we sure will now. And we add on a whole nother layer of sails, making this thing an entire 4 wide. We go to start it up, and sure enough, we get the achievement, A Strong Breeze, which basically means that you've made a windmill at its highest strength. This is the biggest it could possibly go. But as you guys can obviously see, it just isn't enough, and the whole setup is still overstressed. So we're gonna have to get a little more creative. The good news is, I have an idea. We have that one extra precision mechanism that we made a long time ago, and we use it to make yet another speed controller. We can use this to slow the whole thing down so that it will be using less torque. Now that it's turned all the way down, there should be a lot less stress on the whole system. Sure enough, I turn on the windmill and everything fires up. I do see, however, that this is incredibly slow, like this is aggravatingly slow. I try to turn this up to see just how quick we can get, and it's not very far, not even 16. We have to keep it down at 12. Yeah, not ideal, but hey, this is working. The entire system with the mechanical crafters is working. So let's give it a try. After all, we don't need it to be too fast. We just have to use it once. On the start of day 68, we can see if we can get this mechanical crafter working. In the center, we have to put a block. I think any block will do. And then we surround that one block with 4 planks. Then on all of the sides on the outside of this, we put andesite alloy. Then they turn this bright yellow. Perfect. I think this means that it's actually working. Of course, it is in fact going extremely slowly, and I didn't actually set this up perfectly. So while it's going, I have to very quickly rush and make sure that all these arrows are pointed in the correct direction. The idea is you want them all to converge together, just like this. And although this is painfully slow, it turns out it does work. And soon we get our crushing wheels. Now we head over to the rig, because we're gonna start one of the coolest machines I've ever made. I go right over to where the belt ends, and now I'm gonna add another belt, because we're not just gonna dump all that trash into the ocean. No. Now we're gonna start to do some recycling. I set up a gearbox and make sure to glue everything down. Pretty quickly, I start to set up another shaft, and I see that it's turning in the correct direction. Next up, I just have to figure out how I'm gonna add the most important component. Then, on top of those 2 vertical gearboxes, I add our crushing wheels. I've set them directly on top of this belt, so now we should be able to run a belt. So far, this is looking pretty good. Now we just have to figure out how to run a belt so that it will go underneath the crushing wheels. We set this belt up right here so that it will grab everything that normally is thrown off the side of the rig. Eventually, I get this set up so that it leads to this belt, and this belt right here will be running underneath the crushing wheels. I see that the setup is not only going in the correct direction, but is also going super fast. This is already showing a lot of promise. For now, I decide to take off this very last chest because I decided it would be easier to connect a shaft that makes this belt go in the correct direction, so that everything inside these chests will empty onto these belts and eventually end up going through the crusher. Perfect. Now at the very end of the belt, we set up a chest. We then put a brass filter at the end of the chest. But don't worry, this won't just sit here and collect gravel. Let's go to bed so we can get started on the rest of this tomorrow. Ah yes, bright and early on day 69. Resist the urge. I head out to the rig, where I've set up this little area here with these logs. And on top of this, I'm hoping I can put my encased fan. Now with these realistic water physics, in order to actually place water here, we're going to need a slab. However, that shouldn't be a problem. I just have to do a little bit of adjusting here with everything I've set up. The fan can now wash everything that goes down this belt. And if you guys are veterans of Create, you already know why this is amazing. But if you don't know what this is doing, just wait. Now we have a chest as well as a filter to collect everything that gets washed. We set up this filter so that it will not take any crushed ore. That way, if any ore goes through the grinders, it'll stay here to get washed into nuggets. However, more importantly, we also set it up so it will not accept gravel. Now, when cobblestone gets crushed into gravel, it'll have to get washed first. I set this all up and I think it's working, but let's go to bed and check it all the next day. We glue a filter on the back side of this chest. It will only be a temporary holding area until we move everything onto this second belt that will have all these chests here. These chests will collect the final loot. And with that, I believe that this is all set up and should be ready to test. Or at least that's what I was thinking. There's a couple things that I'm realizing are already a problem. First of all, the filter we set here seems to be gone. In addition, there's no water in front of the fan. Those are two very frustrating problems. For the moment, I'm assuming it's a visual glitch, and then I put the shaft in place to get the whole system working. Right away, I see that I was correct. For some reason, the water has disappeared here, and I have to set it back in place again. I then see that I was also correct about the filter. For some reason, sometimes when you send this down underwater, a couple key components get wiped out. Ironically, the water gets removed by the water. Not really sure that makes sense, but that's okay. I think I can figure this out. We get the water back in place, and the filter back in place, and now we can try this one more time. What I determined is before I send this down, I have to break the shaft, remove the filter, and pull the water out of the fan area. Then, once this entire thing is done mining and bring it back, I put the filter in place, put the water in place, and then finally put the shaft in place so that everything will run properly. At least that's what I'm thinking for right now. Luckily, everything seemed to come with this, so step 1 is a success. Let's move this, set it up again, and start mining again. This should be the final test to see if this entire setup actually works. Turn on the windmill, then head up here and make sure that the shaft is not connected. Now this should be clear to start drilling. I send it down, and sure enough, it gets to work. And while I'm watching this go down, seeing if it'll work, I gotta say this is pretty cool. We put this right here on a beach, and it's now drilling down, but the water is flowing in and completely submerging the entire setup. This rig looks really cool, although I have to admit, watching it be submerged under tons of water is a little upsetting. It's pretty amazing too that we have a machine that drills so fast, the water can't even fill it up in time. But I don't want to have it completely underwater before I give this a test. Let's try this setup again. Once it comes to the surface, we put down the filter, the water, and then the shaft. The last thing we do before we turn all this on is we go through each chest and make sure that we pick out anything that we want to keep and don't want to have go through the crushers. We get some ores, and instead of hoarding them, I actually decide it might be smarter to put them in the front of the crusher. The crusher will double these ores up much more efficiently than the millstone, so I actually do want these to go through. Now that everything's in place, I can put the shaft here. It's already starting to show some signs that this is working. The cobblestone goes through, gets crushed up into gravel, and now the gravel is sitting here being washed. And if you haven't played Create before, and if you don't know this, the reason it's so important that we wash gravel is because washing gravel will actually get you a couple of iron nuggets. It's not anything too crazy. It's not like you could go and farm gravel to get iron. I wouldn't recommend that. But when we have this much gravel with this much cobblestone, the amount of iron nuggets will actually start to add up. And we'll be able to recycle all of this cobblestone into iron. After we let this entire system run, these 6 chests here should have all the good loot that we want. Because this is an andesite filter, it means that this chest is filling up much quicker than it can empty. So we will have to probably switch out the andesite filter here for a brass one. Back at home, we craft up the brass filter, have ourselves a little quesadilla dinner, then head to bed. The next morning, I head out to see that this machine is still processing. Yes, it has been running all night. Unfortunately, this andesite filter has slowed it down and bottlenecked it so much that it's going to take a long time. So it's a good thing that we're going to improve this by putting in a brass filter instead. In addition, we replace all the andesite filters with brass filters. That way, when a ton of stuff comes spilling out here, all of these chests can fill up before it all gets shot out of the side here. Now that the system has been upgraded with brass filters, a ton of nuggets should go into this chest, but almost immediately be shot out the other side, where they will then be sucked up by the other brass filters and collect in all 6 of these chests. We send this down to test it to make sure it's working so far. While it's drilling, I don't really have too much to do, so I decide to have a little fun here. I get on my boat to see if there's current in all this water. I'm wondering if I'll actually be sucked down by the water into this giant quarry. I start to get close, and I start bobbing up and down, but it doesn't seem too bad. Then I start to realize, yeah, this is about to be a water slide, and very quickly I get sucked down and start to ride this river down into the bottom of this quarry. Although I feel pretty safe. Nothing bad could happen, right? Until I end up in this pit over here and start getting really sucked down to the bottom of this vortex. I have to abandon this boat and try to swim my way back to the surface. I actually come down here to see this thing mining. It's pretty cool to see it in action. This entire loadout is pretty impressive, and I'm proud of this machine. What's not so impressive is the fact that I'm now stuck down here. I start to walk up this little staircase, and as I do, I realize something. The volcanoes and the geysers and the raising sea levels are all pretty destructive, but I think I might now be the biggest effect on the environment here. I might be the biggest factor on changing the face of this entire world. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing at this point. Now that the rig seems to have stopped, I hit the lever, and luckily the whole thing comes right back up without any problems. Now we'll get a chance to see if this entire system actually works. Remember, first things first, we have to put the filter here. Next, we have to add our water back here. But first, we have to go around to every chest and pick out all the ores we want. We get a ton of iron, as well as copper and zinc, and set them all out here. Now we just have to make sure that this whole belt system is moving in the right direction. I put down the shaft, and in no time at all these chests start to empty out all of their cobble, and it starts to roll towards the crushers to get processed. The first things first is that this little belt right here loads up with a bunch of crushed ore. This is amazing. Pretty soon we'll have a huge injection of resources. It just has to take a little time to get washed. I stay up that night and take a look at everything working. Basically what we've invented is a giant drill that will get us a huge amount of resources. And then we've set up a processing system right on the rig that will double the ores, if not triple the ores that we get. We will then be getting a ton more resources and more iron from what used to be trash as we turn all the cobble into iron nuggets. And I gotta say, I'm pretty proud of this setup here. What I'm not so proud of is the fact that I completely ignored the disasters unfolding around me. On day 75, we get hit by another huge flood. The tidal waves rush in while I'm sleeping, and they completely flood my entire house. My entire base is now almost a full block underwater, and the water is still rushing in. It could fill up even more, and my house isn't the only thing that's flooded. I look over, and immediately I see my worst fear. My entire food source. The farm has been completely wiped out. Avocado trees, all the crops, everything. My entire food source is annihilated. I'm in real trouble here. As I look around, I see that it's currently unfolding as I look at it. Waves are washing over all of this. Now I have to figure out another solution to save our farm. How do I get this safer? Should I build a giant dome around this like I did before? Should I try to relocate the farm for a third time? And what if that gets wiped out by water? I do see one piece of good news. My lab and all of my machines are well above water and dry. I can use them to try to find some solution. The chicken area is immediately flooding, the farm is decimated, and my house is well underwater. This could be a big problem. I knew this was coming. I mean, like, seriously, I've seen the water level rising constantly. Why didn't I prepare for this? Why didn't I think this was gonna happen? I was getting way too distracted with my cool little machine there. Speaking of which, let's go check on that machine. I know that there's a couple components here that are in danger of being flooded and being ruined. The filter might get wiped out, and we may lose some resources like gravel. That's not too bad. What's the worst thing that could happen? I look around to see that there's just a couple of peaks left. Almost the entire area has been submerged in water. All that work we've done to unflood this place has been immediately erased. The water level has become insanely high and has raised almost an entire 5 blocks. This is the highest it's ever been, and honestly, the entire place is submerged. I head back to my machine and see that the water is now flowing and is on top of the machine. I think it's time we break it down and move it to higher ground. That's when it hits me. Because this is underwater, I cannot place this lever here. If you can't place this lever, that means I can't move it. This entire rig is now stuck. Because of this water, because I can't put down this lever, I've lost this entire contraption. I do some quick thinking. There's got to be a way to save this, right? I start to put some planks up, hoping that I can make a little wall. Maybe I can bail water out of here and find some kind of area where I could put down this lever and get this all out of here. To be honest with you, I was pretty hopeful. It looked like everything was working pretty well. I dig out a little spot here. There's a nice little dry pocket of air here where I can place the lever down. Unfortunately, as soon as I do this, and as soon as I switch this lever, it means that the contraption technically doesn't exist, and water then comes rushing through this wall. As soon as it rushes through, it breaks the lever and undoes all that work almost in a nanosecond, meaning that this just can't move. I'm gonna have to find some way to remove the water from this area and stop it from flooding in, or else I'm just gonna have to admit defeat and abandon this entire rig. In the meantime, I guess I'm just gonna have to live inside of a flooded base. I mean, look at this. I mean, this is ridiculous. I guess here's the good news. Let's be honest. All of these chests here are safe. This isn't too far underwater, so I can still get to all my stuff and get to all my food that I already have saved up. Yes, I might run out of food without a farm, but I should have enough stockpiled to keep me going for a little bit. The real problem is I can't set my bed down underwater. I'm not gonna be able to sleep through the nights. The sun is setting on day 75, and I have made no progress. All I've done the whole day is run around and try to figure out what's going on. So, it looks like I'm gonna have to put my engineer brain to work. I start to get a bit of copper, and I look through our recipes. If I can crush some of it and flatten it, I might be able to make a pump. Maybe then I can move some of the water around. With 8 of these, we should be able to move a good amount of water. Now we just have to suck that water up, which we do through a hose pulley. A hose pulley isn't too complicated, it just requires a little bit more copper that's been pressed. No problem there. Also, a little bit of kelp, but luckily, we've been farming kelp, so we should be safe there too. In no time at all, we managed to get ourselves 8 hose pulleys. I don't know what I'm going to do here. I don't know if I'm going to try to build up a giant wall and empty water out of this whole area. I don't know if I'm going to try to temporarily move something. I still haven't quite figured that out. All I know is I'm making some progress. I have to figure something out. And if any mobs start to surround me, I could be in trouble. So I need a temporary area where I can hide away and sleep through the nights. I go to the very top of the very tallest tree and I set my bed up here. And as I go to sleep at night, I start to get a bit of a plan. But that's definitely way further down the line. For now, I'm focused on building up a wall all the way around my digging contraption. I'm not giving up on this thing. This idea may be a little ridiculous and it may take a ton of work, but I've decided no matter what, I'm going to save at least this rig. Maybe I'll have to give up on the house, but at least there'll be some sort of salvation. As I'm digging, I see my farmland that I've abandoned. This area is now well underwater. It used to be the high ground. This is ridiculous. Eventually, at the very end of that day, I managed to get the entire wall surrounding the rig set up. Now, this little area is completely cut off from the rest of the rising ocean. So, I decide now it's time to hook up these pumps. Maybe these will be able to empty all the water out of this area. I then decide I could also use the windmill that is powering this rig to also power the pumps. We place all of the hose pulleys so that they're touching the end of the pumps. This is where the hoses will go down and hopefully start to suck out all this water. Now, of course, we have to make those hoses go down. I'm hoping I can connect these pulleys to this whole belt system and get all of them lowered. Of course, nothing's easy, and pretty soon I find out that I'm actually overstressed. That's not too much of a problem though. I figure that if I go down underwater, I can recalibrate this to slow the whole machine down. Remember, if the machines are running slower, they use less stress. Therefore, if we turn this down a little bit, the windmill shouldn't be overstressed. And sure enough, everything starts working. Pretty quickly, we start to get some of these hoses down to the bottom of the ocean here. Now that all the hoses have been drawn out and we don't need to worry about those anymore, I've decided I'm going to draw power directly from the central gear. I start to connect some cogs so that they'll be lined up with directly powering the pumps. I break this shaft to let all the power be focused on the pumps. Then I finally hook them all up with the small cogs. Perfect. Now all we have to do is make sure that all of the pumps are facing the right way, and this should start to work. I'm already getting some good news as some of the pumps are pouring water out. Go through with the wrench and make sure they're all facing out. Pretty soon, all 6 of these pumps are now shooting water out. This is a really good sign. Unfortunately, it isn't guaranteed that this is all working just yet. It'll take a little bit of time before we know if all the water is actually being drained. By the time I get down here at the start of the next day, I already have a huge relief. It is, in fact, working. This is a huge relief, as I can hear bucket after bucket after bucket being emptied, and I can immediately see all of the water being sucked out, and the water level is immediately getting much, much lower inside the wall as opposed to outside. It doesn't take too long, and pretty soon, almost all the water is removed. This is great. This is exactly what I wanted. The question is this good enough? Is this actually going to help us get this machine lifted? So, at the end of the day, once I'm sure the pumps are completely finished, now it's time to finally see if we can't save this rig. Just like always, we shut the whole thing down and turn off the windmill. Now we place the lever here, and sure enough, it sticks. Perfect. This should work. I use my wrench and hit the cart, and all of a sudden, a huge amount of relief swells up inside me all at once here. I am so glad that this worked. Everything stuck together, nothing was broken or waterlogged or damaged. There's probably a smarter way to do this. I don't care. We saved our rig, one of my favorite machines in this playthrough. We managed to get it out. Of course, it would probably be nice to save my house also. Kind of valuable. I look in a chest and I see some linear chassis, and I get an idea. That involves crafting up some linear chassis, then immediately going to bed, then getting up the next morning and crafting even more chassis. Eventually, I managed to make quite a few chassis, as I plan to put them underneath my house. Of course, underneath my house is also underneath water. It's making it a little bit difficult to breathe, which is why I immediately start looking up how to make some scuba gear. Luckily, the helmet's pretty easy, just a little bit of copper. Then we make ourselves a back tank. This is the critical part. We then charge up this copper tank by putting it at the end of a spinning shaft. And soon, we trade out a little bit of armor in our chest plate for 15 minutes of being able to swim underwater. And yes, that's definitely going to come in handy. We get underneath the house, and once again, we start getting to laying out all of these chassis. And also, we're going to be getting a little distracted and swimming around the entire world. I have to say this is very strange that I'm now swimming in an area that was well above ground. Seriously, this entire area used to be the surface. The beach line is like 10 blocks below water. This is kind of crazy. As soon as we have some more wood, we can take all this back, and now we can start to make even more linear chassis. But now we should have enough to get all these set out under the house. I almost finished, but it gets dark, and being underwater in the dark is no fun. And early on the next day, we finally get the entire platform of linear chassis set out underneath our house. Unfortunately, I think that was the easy part. Now, we make a little hole in the center of the floor all the way down to the chassis, and we have to make a little hole in the roof that goes directly down to that hole in the floor, right in the center of the house. Next up, we start to take some bridges and start to build up top. First off, I just kind of like this. It seems like we're now jungle people living amongst the trees, but also this is really going to help me get back and forth to a platform I'm going to be building right above my house. That night, I start to set up our floating platform where we'll be making our next machine. At the start of the next day, we set out a rope pulley directly over our Tiki Hut. Then we set out a vertical gearbox, and on top of that, we put a windmill bearing and set out another windmill. This windmill isn't anything too crazy. It's pretty slow, but that's okay. I don't need to rush this. Now, I'm almost ready to start the next stage of this crazy project. Unfortunately, there's 3 key components that we still have to work on. The first one is super easy. Just like over on our digging rig, if we're going to be using a rope pulley, we also need to combine it with a gear shift. We craft one of those up, and then we adjust this windmill system so that it can work with the gear shift. Once everything's in place, I head over so that I can actually put a lever on the gear shift. When I find out, it's already working. I see that the pulley is now slowly starting to go all the way down, and hopefully it will connect with this linear chassis all the way down here. This house still needs a lot of prep before it's ready to be hoisted into the air. First of all, I have to figure out what I'm going to do with this pulley system that's putting kelp into the house. But pretty soon, I see that the rope pulley has now entered the house. This is perfect. It should go all the way down and end up in the center and hopefully attached to the linear chassis below. This is perfect. And I think that my crazy plan here might actually work. At this point, I think you guys already know where I'm going with this. And yes, it is just as silly as you think it will be. And I'm excited to see it happen. And that glitch in their water looks kind of goofy, but it lets me know that this is actually going to work. But like I said, there's still a lot more prep to go around. The next step here is that we have to make sure that everything is actually attached. The next day, I put on my scuba gear and I head down below. If you hit a linear chassis with a slime ball, it will get sticky on this side. But if you do it twice, it'll get sticky on the opposite side. That means we can very easily go around and just simply double tap every single piece of chassis with the slime ball. And now everything will be covered in slime and the whole house will be sticking to this chassis. Easy. Unfortunately, the hardest part is still to come. As you can see when I hold my wrench out, anything that's glowing white like this is attached to the chassis, and this is actually working. But obviously, there's a lot of the roof that's not attached, and that's a big problem. If there's any gaps between the chassis and any blocks above it, like how we have a lot of gaps in between the floor and the roof, that means that the roof won't be attached. And sadly, the entire thing can't move if there's something like the roof blocking it. So we're gonna have to figure out how to solve that problem. Basically, there's two solutions. Number one is we can let the whole house collapse. That would be really frustrating because essentially I'd have to cut the whole roof off and rebuild that. Not a huge fan. Unfortunately, the second option might not be any easier or quicker. We have to fill in all the blank spaces in the house. One way I decided to do that I don't think is too expensive is by using shafts. Basically, we can use this kind of like packing material. Anywhere we put a shaft that's connected all the way to the roof, that piece of the roof will then be attached to the whole machine. That's pretty easy because we can make a ton of shafts very cheaply and they're useful for other projects in the future. Unfortunately, it means that we have to go through the entire house and fill up all of the empty space where I live with shafts. Time consuming and kind of annoying. But hey, at this point, it's better than drowning. And yes, like I said, we are going to have to break this stuff off too. It would be a little difficult to move all of this at once, and besides, I have plenty of kelp. I'll be alright. Now it's time to go around and just keep installing all these shafts. Yes, this is quite a project. It'll definitely take us all the way to the next day. Hopefully, this will pay off, and it'll be something that's actually pretty cool. At least I think it'll turn out to be pretty cool. As the sun rises the next day, I'm about halfway done, and I have to say, this does look a little silly. There's now a bunch of rods running down my house, and yeah, I know, I always go back to the nuclear craft, but it almost weirdly looks like control rods all the way through my Tiki Hut. Either way, the shafts are super cheap and easy to make. And also, I can check with my wrench to see what's attached, and I can pretty quickly see this is all working perfectly. There's a couple supports and a couple pieces of the roof that are probably going to get left behind, but that's okay. As long as the majority of the roof and the main body of the house all go, this should work. The hope that I don't have to abandon this and I can finally use some ingenuity to get this house out of the water is keeping me going, even if it's a little bit goofy. Eventually, it is starting to look like we might have the entire house ready to go. I head up top on day 82, and we give this our very first attempt. I do have to say, it's pretty crazy with all this rain coming down to look and see just how this world has changed. If this works, we might be able to outsmart it. We flip the switch, and sure enough, it's happening. Or at least I thought it was happening. It stops all of a sudden, and now I'm not quite sure if this is working. Sure enough, the house is still very much underwater. I must have missed something or miscalculated here, because the house gets stuck and is no longer moving anywhere. I look around, but to be honest with you guys, I'm kind of dumbfounded here. I just can't figure out what I'm doing wrong. So I head back up top, and I try to give this one more chance. Maybe I just misclicked or something went wrong there. We flip the switch, and it starts to head down. We flip the switch again, and it starts to head up, although I'm sure it will stop any second now. But here's the thing. It doesn't. It's continuing to go up, and it gets a few more blocks higher than stops. So I flip the switch again. Basically, I'm treating this whole thing like a router. I'm turning it on and off. Pretty soon, it's just going. The house is raising. and I jump down to see that we've done exactly what I was dreaming of doing. Look at this. The entire house has now been raised up. It's been lifted almost an entire 3 blocks and is now well above all of the other platforms and is in fact bone dry. It is outside of the water. We've officially lifted our house up into the air and it's now safe from the floods. You can see the very front of my house, some of it's actually collapsed. Some of the roof actually got crunched down here. It actually gets attached, and now this might actually be able to go up. So I get back up to the top to give it one more try. And now I see it. Like an elevator, my house is now floating through the air. This is amazing. I've essentially managed to dredge my own house and have saved it from the floods. This is so cool. I'm so proud that I could do this. In fact, I run to bed because I want to see this during the day. I get up in time to see that this whole entire thing is now being raised up into the sky. From the roof up here, I can see that it's very slowly starting to climb, and we are now way up, maybe 10 whole blocks above the surface of the water. This is amazing. I don't care how much this island sinks. If we get all the way up to the top here, we'll be safe. We'll have done it. With our ingenuity and our understanding of create and a little bit of creativity, we saved our house. This is awesome. Along with our dig rig, this is one of the coolest things I've ever done. I can't tell you how happy I am that this all worked out. Okay, granted, I totally admit it is a little goofy. Yes, the entire house is filled up with shafts, which looks silly. The whole front roof part has definitely collapsed. And if I were to do this again, there's a few things that I could probably improve, sure. But honestly, I don't care. I've managed to take my house and lift it up into the air. I don't know how many of the millions of Minecraft players could say they've ever done that. Okay, I'm getting a little proud of myself here. After all, we still have a lot of work to do here. First things first, as cool as this is, I do think that it looks a little goofy that this tiny little bridge is holding up this whole house. So I go ahead and make a ton of supports. Now I'm going to be putting them underneath the house, so this entire house is now standing on stilts way up in the sky. I'll admit, it takes a little while. The good news is, with these giant trees, we have all these vines, so it's pretty easy to get up and down. And in no time at all, I have all of these supports set out, and now my house looks like it's teetering high up in the sky on these huge stilts, all safe from all the storms, tsunamis, geysers, and hopefully volcano eruptions. That night, I jump down into my house, and I begin the somewhat tedious process of breaking out all these shafts. It isn't anything too horrible though, and after a hard night's work of removing all these shafts, pretty quickly by the next day, we have ourselves our home. After spending a whole night removing all these shafts and doing some small repairs with the roof, we can say we've done it. We've officially saved our home. The roof is back in place, looking good. Now there's just one problem here. The front door kind of, well, goes to nowhere. So what I'm going to try to do now is make a staircase, and instead of leading it all the way down to the water, I'm going to embrace my new life in the trees as I make this new staircase up instead of down, heading back up to the trees. I really like the macaw blocks here. I think this staircase is really cool, although I will admit it's a little bit goofy and a little difficult to set up. It takes me almost an entire day to figure out how to make a staircase back up to the trees. But when I'm done, I think it's well worth it. At the start of the next day, I get to see this thing, and although it's a little bit goofy, I really like it. Now, I can go from my house up to the top of this tree. And I can easily get to the top of that tree by climbing the vines. Truly, I've become one with living amongst the treetops. And it's only day 84. I have plenty of time to continue to expand my new house up here in the trees. In fact, I'm so happy to be up here. Just before the day ends, I grab my bed from atop the trees and I bring it down my brand new staircase into my house, which is now hanging high above the water. I then break the rope so that now I can remove the pulley and the house will no longer be hanging. And more importantly, now I can use this whole setup for something else. I think you guys already know where I'm going with this, but I won't get ahead of myself. For right now, I'm just happy that I can set my head down on the bed here. I wake up on day 85, and I gotta say, it's kind of cool. I'm literally up inside of a massive treehouse. Even with everything going on, I'm still having a lot of fun. Exploding volcanoes and geysers haven't gotten me down. This is still a really cool island, and I'm not even done yet. We still have quite a few projects left in these next 15 days. After all, our farm is flooded. We're still gonna have to figure out a way to keep our bellies full. But don't worry, you guys already know, I have an idea for that. Now that the rope pulley system has been completely removed from this house, and it's now standing on its own supports, it's time to move this windmill and rope pulley system away. However, I'm going to try to take everything that I've learned from the dig rig and try to make this a contraption. I set out the dig rig to look at it to see exactly what I did. And I see I did in fact set up the speed controller on top of the cart. So that's where I'll be starting our new setup as we try to make this its own contraption. In truth, this isn't too much of a loss. I can break most of this down. The thing is, I just don't want to break down the windmill. For some reason, breaking down and then rebuilding the windmill, I'm just done with it. I've already done it too many times. We simply glue the windmill bearing to one shaft, then a vertical gearbox, and then finally, we put that speed controller here. This is the base on which we will now add the minecart. Next up, we add the large cog on top, just like we did on our other contraption, making sure to glue everything together. You know how scared I get. Finally, we put that gearbox, glue that on, and then of course, we put the rope pulley and glue that on as well. Now I think everything in this little contraption here is ready to go. Let's get a minecart and a minecart assembler ready to package this thing up and make it into a contraption. Just like on the other contraption, we simply put a lever on the cart assembler, flip it once the windmill is off, and then we can use our wrench to pick this up. And now we have another contraption. This one is a pulley system that we can use to try to raise up anything that we need. With that finally done, I decide that I'm going to recycle some of these chassis. I build my way up to the bottom of the house and I start to break down all the chassis since we won't be using them anymore. These will go to our next build, however we decide to make our next lift. Although I will warn you guys, this is going to be way more challenging and is not going to be this simple. Not like this at all. Also, I gotta say, once the chassis are removed, I do think it looks much better. Speaking of looking good, I decide that I don't want to have all of my stuff just floating up in the air. Like I said, I want to have a bunch of trees supporting everything. So I go around and I start to set up a bunch of giant jungle wood trees, which will basically be like the natural foundations of our new builds. I'm a big sucker for anytime you put vertical dimension into a house. When you make builds really tall and at different levels like this, I just think it's so cool. And when it's this practical and looks this good, there's something about this house, even though it's small, that just makes me so hyped. Now, on top of this giant tree, we'll set up a little base camp where we'll be able to deploy our next machine that can hopefully help us get the farm set up. We start to make a ton of bridges, just like we did before, and just like we did before, we're now going to connect them so that they're hovering just over the farm. Also, we're going to connect them all the way over to this tree. I use some of the stairs to make the attachment over here by the tree look a little bit better. And by that night, I gotta say, I really like how this is looking. Like we've built our way into the trees. In fact, I like it so much, I decided to directly connect it to the bridges that go over my house. In my book, the more bridges, the better. So we start to take this bridge and go out directly above the farm. Once again, we're gonna set a platform up here. Then we're gonna lower our pulley contraption down onto this farm. But I gotta tell you, this time it gets a little bit different. But you'll see that soon enough. In fact, it already starts to be a little bit different right here. Instead of just lowering it down, I'm actually going to build up. This way I can bring the entire farm up higher. I try to center myself, then I set down the railway, the cart assembly, and the new contraption. Only this time, I'm not gonna lower this down and try to pick up the farm. Instead, I'm gonna do things a little differently. Now that I think this is pretty centered, let's set down all the linear chassis. However, this time, we are not setting the linear chassis down underneath the platform. No. Now, I'm going to be setting the chassis out up in the air, and then lowering the entire chassis setup down on top of the farm. Unfortunately, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting all these chassis to lay out the correct direction. They're all going vertically instead of horizontally or something, and it's just not working too well. So I decided to go with a different tactic, and I begin to put out a ton of slabs. Then I can lay the chassis horizontally on top of these super easily. I look directly down and make sure I've lined up all these slabs directly over everything in the farm. That way all the chassis will be directly over everything that they need to pick up. Once they're all laid out, it's time to add all the chassis. And with all these slabs out here, this goes much quicker and is a lot easier. There's still going to be some challenges though. For example, I don't know how the trees are going to work. I'm afraid that I might have to cut them down. Also, I don't know how the windmill is going to work. I'm considering, is the arm going to work? Do I have to attach chassis to the arm as well? I decide it's probably better to be safe. I run a few chassis out this direction, directly over the arm, so that they can connect there as well. Now, time to test it out. I lower the rope down, and sure enough, it connects. I think this is working. Now, it's time to run around and add all the slime. Remember, if we add slime twice to each linear chassis, it will be glued on the bottom, which means that as this thing lowers down, it will then be glued to everything it touches. At the start of the next day, we make one last pass, making sure that every single piece of this has glue on both sides. Now, I think it's time to test this out. We start to lower it, and just like before, it's a little sticky, but all I have to do is switch it on and off a few times, and in no time at all, we're once again heading down as we go to pick up our farm. I have no idea if this is going to work, or if this is going to totally ruin everything. There's a decent chance I might go down and actually crush the farm, but I guess we'll find out. The first little problem we have is that we actually run into our house, but pretty easy to fix as we cut out a few of these supports. Now there should be enough room so that this platform can continue to go down. Just one small problem now, I can't get over to the floating rope pulley. So now I make myself a temporary path that goes all the way over here so that I can reach this lever, and I start flipping it again. I then jump down ahead of this, kind of scary there, but as I look back up, sure enough, this entire platform is lowering down and about to touch the farm. So let's see what actually happens. Everything lowers down, and I'm not exactly sure if everything connects. So I decide to cut out the rest of the slabs so that now it's just the glue directly facing the farm. Now I just lower it down one more block. Sure enough, it's attached to the very top of the trees and has come to a stop right there. Fortunately, we'll definitely have to do better than this. At the start of day 89, I decide to lift this thing up. Let's just see what's actually connected. I get a peek here and I get some bad news. Turns out, yep, it's just the two little blocks of leaves from the tops of the trees, so not ideal. Once again, I lower this thing, and I anticipate that I'm going to have to use a lot of shafts and connect everything to the bottom. It's kind of terrible and not exactly what I wanted, but it'll have to do. The first thing I connect is the windmill. I actually don't know if this is going to work, and I have this weird sinking feeling that this windmill might not actually work. So I kind of want to just test this out right here first to see if it's even possible. I also decide to crank up the chassis here so that now they'll be pulling more of the farm, and it looks like they're going to grab the entire trees and maybe even grab the entire windmill. I'm hoping it doesn't tear the whole thing apart, but I guess we'll find out. I throw the switch and start to raise this thing up. All right, let's look down here and see what's actually happened. Sure enough, as the entire thing raises up, I see two things. One, we've completely ripped the trees out and left all the leaves behind. Oops, that's not great. But more importantly, the entire windmill and the arm have all come up. This is actually really good news. I feel bad about the trees, but I feel really good that the most important part of the whole setup has actually very cleanly come up. This is probably the hardest part taken care of. Now we just have to figure out how to get the entire bottom platform and all the dirt to come up. Just then, I get another idea. What if I connect a strip of chassis that go all the way down, and at the bottom of this little strip here, I connect a row of horizontal chassis. When I put glue on these chassis, they should grip onto all of the wood and the dirt. Maybe this will be lifted up all by itself. At least that's what I was hoping. I give it a try and lift it up. And that night, I see maybe a lack of success. However, I do realize I might have made a mistake here. I need to put glue on these chassis. Now, when I lowered them, they should grab onto the logs, and they should pick up the entire triangle and lift it into the air. At least again, that's what I'm hoping. So once again, we lower this whole thing down so that now the chassis with the glue are connected to the wood. But as I use the wrench, I'm seeing that this isn't lighting up, and I'm not having very high hopes. Sure enough, that night, I lift the whole thing up again to see if it's worked, and I guess technically there's some progress. As the next day starts, I can see that some of the wood has gone up, but realistically we've left all the dirt and like 90% of the farm behind. So yeah, definitely needs improvement. So at the start of day 90, I realize I'm kind of running out of time here. I have 10 days to figure this out, and I still have a few other platforms I have to lift up. Let's see if we've made any progress. As we lift this up, once again, I see that now we've gotten some of the dirt. Technically everything we've glued is now working. But this really can't be the answer. This is starting to get very silly. Am I really gonna have to lift this thing up, run down there, put a bunch of glue on, and do this over and over again? This really might take 100 days if I do it that way. I do try a clever little solution here. As I get a redstone link, I plop that on top, essentially meaning that now I can set up a remote controlled system. Now I set this up to be a receiver, and this little remote controller I have in my hand can now be used to lift and lower this without coming up here and toggling the lever back and forth. I know this isn't an elegant solution, but it does make it a lot easier. I don't have to climb up and down this tree 100 times. Let's see if this isn't a little more practical. I lift up the entire thing a little bit, and as it gets up into the air, I can then let it go. And as it comes down, I'll throw a bunch of glue. It will then connect, and I can lift up those. I can repeat this process until the entire thing is all glued into one big piece. At least that was the ridiculous idea I was thinking of. Trust me, this is not a good look. This is not the way you should do this. And if I continued down this path, I could probably figure out some way to make it all work. Luckily though, I do find a slightly smarter way. At the start of the next day, I'm trying to figure out how to make these chassis work, and I'm seeing that a portion of it is actually lighting up. So once I actually figure out what I'm doing wrong, I should be able to do this much easier than just gluing everything together. I just have to use my brain a little bit here and figure this out. Sure enough, I then managed to make 2 rows of chassis. Not only will it now be attached to the dirt, but also the slabs underneath the dirt. Now the entire platform should be picked up. I'm thinking that this might be an actual solution. As I go to lift it, I gotta admit, I'm kind of stunned. It's working pretty well. In fact, it's working fantastically. The entire thing, well, okay, almost the entire thing is coming up. There's just this one small piece right here that isn't being attached to the whole thing. And I think I can pretty easily figure this out. I take this apart and make extra sure that there's glue attached everywhere. I double glue up everything as much as I can and then put everything back together. Sure enough, I give this one last try, and now the entire platform raises up all at once. I didn't have to put glue everywhere. I didn't have to put a bunch of shafts connecting everything. All I had to do was connect a few extra chassis down to the bottom and a few shafts in the right place. And now, this entire platform is being raised up into the air. This is pretty amazing, I'm not gonna lie, and I'm pretty proud that I figured out how to do this in a much more intelligent way. However, the remote control is a little bit silly. I decided to remove it, and I put back the good old lever. In no time at all, this entire thing has raised up into the air. I put one little piece of dirt as a buffer so that this whole thing doesn't get detached, and pretty soon, our farm is now lifted up into the sky. I head down to take a look at it, and I gotta admit, this is pretty amazing. It's perfectly tucked into the side of the tree here, right next to my house, and right next to these other trees. I really couldn't ask for this to work out much better. I'll admit, it doesn't look too pretty. We did rip out all the trees, and the water has wiped away all the crops. So we still have to do some work and manicuring to make it all look good, but this is about the biggest success we could have asked for. At the start of the next day, I start to break all the shafts so that I can free up this windmill, and I now use some bridges to connect everything so it's much easier to walk around. As the sun rises, it's already looking so much better. I set this block right down here where I place a railroad, and then of course, I put the cart assembly as well as a cart. Now we can detach the rope pulley and move this on to something else, if we have the time. I'll admit, it's getting a little tight here. If we end with just this farm and my house being raised out of the water, I'd be pretty happy. But just in case, let's take this contraption away. With the contraption removed, there's still a few chassis right here, but I think I'm going to keep these in place. I test to make sure that the arm and the windmill are still working, and sure enough they are. I gotta be honest, I'm pretty happy with how this all turned out. It's day 92, and we're almost at the end of this 100 days. And although we don't have much time, I am going to spend a little bit of it trying to remake this farm, starting out with these 2 avocado trees. I do have to replace the water here. For whatever reason, whenever you lift things up with these contraptions, the water always seems to fall through. I think that might be a water physics thing. I'm not really sure. One little bucket of water, it's not really a problem. The only thing I wish would have gone a little smoother, this end interface and this entire chest full of food didn't get picked up. Unfortunately, I do have to take that up by hand, but it's not too bad. With these vines here and the carry-on mod, I can carry this entire chest up. It isn't too much trouble. I get back to the top, and I set this interface up just like I did back on day 10. We have the 2 interfaces with a funnel, the chute, and of course, we add the 2 chests. At the start of the next day, we get our avocados planted, but I'm not 100% sure they're actually in the right spot. I guess we'll find out soon enough. In the meantime, I start to put down all of our crops. Now, without the kelp, I won't be able to get California rolls as well, but I don't really care about that. I want to plant the farm the exact way we had it down there, even if it's just purely for a little bit of nostalgia. So we get almost all the crops down, And I go to bone meal up the trees. Unfortunately, the avocado trees are off by just 1 block. They're just a little too tall. Now, on day 93, I decide I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did with the house. I'm going down to the very bottom, and I'm going to build up all these platforms so that the farm is actually sitting on these giant stilts. This is good because I think aesthetically it just looks nicer. I don't like to have the farm just floating up in the air, but also it gives me an opportunity to put this block of dirt here. I need to put this dirt here a little bit lower so that it will actually be able to hold the avocado trees. I do this on both sides and almost fall to my death. Now I'm kind of glad the whole world flooded. And I don't quite get all the way done. I have to go to bed, but by the start of the next day, I managed to not only get the dirt in the right place so that now we can grow our avocado trees, but I get the second stilt completely set up. Only 2 more to go. Pretty quickly, I get those in place as well, and now I can set up the avocados at the correct level. A little bit of bone meal, and sure enough, they are perfect. Now I just have to fix that other one, but that's not going to be too hard. Finally, with all the stilts set up and all the avocado trees in the right spot, we now have the farm looking just the way we had it when it was down on the ground floor. Only now, it's up here in the sky, getting more sunlight, a little more air, and I gotta say, this is looking pretty amazing. I've seen tons of YouTubers build cool houses up in the trees, but this is really a whole new level. I built a house and then raised it up into the trees. This is truly next level. Like literally, it's been raised up a level. And as happy as I am to see all this, it's the end of day 94. We have less than 6 days to figure out a way to get those 3 remaining platforms up into the air. And one thing that will help us use our limited time really well is putting some vines right here. The idea is I can climb these vines right from the water straight up into my house. And once again, I get to show you how Captain is not so brilliant. Am I crazy? Like, I seriously thought you could bone meal vines. Anyway, that doesn't matter, because eventually I do find a way to run these vines all the way down to the water. And by the start of day 95, we now have some vines that go straight up to our house. Hopefully this will help speed us up a little bit. What will also help us speed things up is to make sure we have all these bridges in the right place. I have this one directly over the platform, and my goal is to get this platform to come directly up to this bridge. We'll see though, maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself. For now, I just go around and raise up all of these other trees. We'll be able to connect bridges from all these platforms to all these trees. Speaking of which, we're going to connect this tree to the newest tree, the one that is directly over the lab where we're going to be working from to try to get everything raised up. Once the bridges are in place, it's time to figure out where do we want to build up to and set up this rig to raise this out of the water. I think I'm at the proper height, so I set up the rig and it's now perfectly right over the platform below us. And just before I go to bed for day 96, I decide I'm going to do this one a little bit differently. Hopefully we can figure out a way to get this lift working that's a little bit smoother. This time, we're going to be using a fusion of our first 2 methods. So we're going to go underneath these platforms, and just like with our house, we're going to be setting out all these linear chassis on the bottom. Hopefully this will pick everything up, and then double gluing them so that the top of the chassis will be glued to this platform. And yes, this does take a long time and a couple of air tanks. In fact, I'm already to day 97 and I'm really running out of time here. I have to get even more andesite alloy, even more logs to make even more linear chassis. I'm crafting, placing, and farming all night, all the way to day 98. So, on the start of day 98, with only 2 days left to go, this better work. We've really invested in this chassis plan, but I think this might actually work out. Once again, I have to fill up my back tank so I can go down underwater and place even more chassis. In no time at all, I managed to get all the chassis in place to lift up the lab, and the spare platform that has the mechanical crafters, and I even get enough chassis to cover the platform with our orchard and our chickens. All I have to do now is glue them all together. And yes, of course, it takes all day. But that night, I used my wrench to see what is connected, and I'm pretty pleasantly surprised to see a lot of this is working perfectly. Of course, there's still a few core components that are gonna need a lot of work. I come back home, but not to go to bed. Just like with our house, we're gonna be grabbing a ton of these shafts and try to fill in all the space and pack everything together so that this will all lift all as one. This process is a little bit tricky. If I don't put shafts in all the right places, then some of these machines will collapse and it could break my laboratory. Unfortunately, I don't have very much time to go slow and be careful. I have to throw all these shafts down everywhere I think they should be as quickly as I can. It can be a little tricky too. I'm not 100% sure what needs shafts and what doesn't. But I'm basically placing shafts everywhere I possibly can. I don't want to take any chances. The worst spot is the trees. Remember, when we tried to lift the trees on the farm, it did not go well. Hopefully, I can figure out a way to make this go a little bit smoother. Of course, that means I have to take all these shafts and connect all the tops of the trees down to the ground. Yeah, I'm not super excited about this, and I'm not sure that this is actually going to work. But as the sun starts to rise on day 99, I know I at least have to try. Although, to be honest with you guys, I was not feeling too confident about this at all. I remember how weird the farm worked with all those trees, so for most of these, we're going to cut them down and just replant them when they get up to the top. Speaking of, I can already see here on day 99, the water level is rising again, and just like I had feared, it's now come up so high, it's starting to flood into the laboratory. The very last area that had some dry ground is now starting to get little patches of water as the sea is starting to rise up and cover this whole entire area. So the rope pulley starts to go down its huge descent all the way down to the chassis underneath the water. Now the bad news is that the flooding has gotten severe. I mean, everything is now almost an entire block underwater. But the good news is I have no reason to think that this isn't going to work. So ahead up top, as the sun is setting on day 99, and this might be our last chance. The good news is that it's working. I can see that the rope is headed up and these platforms are now dry. And we're doing it. Was it smooth, easy, or clean? No. But I don't really care. We've done it. We've managed to lift up our entire base, all 3 platforms, all at once, just before the real flooding wiped everything out. And now, with our ingenuity, we've saved our base. Yes, it's a little bit goofy. We accidentally managed to lift up an entire bunch of sand into the air. I might actually try to fix that. That's a little bit too ridiculous. I gotta say, it's pretty awesome to see it nice and dry and well above the rising water. Yeah, to be honest with you, we basically got this all solved. Although, to make it a little bit nicer, we do have to dunk the entire thing back underwater. The thing is, once it's down and in place, we can come down here and dig out everything that's attached to the glue. The chassis are actually holding on to all this stuff, and when I raise this up, it's pulling a bunch of sand and dirt out of the water. It's not really a problem, but let's be real, it does look a little silly. So, on day 99, I go to bed, and I'll spend the rest of day 100 trying to clean this up and make it look as good as I can. The next day, I'm feeling pretty confident I've done what I can, so we lift this up one more time on day 100. Let's see how it actually looks. Yes, we're probably going to have to replace the trees over there, and an entire blade of the windmill's been ripped off. Whoops. But for the most part, this entire thing came up really cleanly. And I decide to do a little bit more extra credit, as I'm going to get ready to lower this down into the perfect spot. You know, technically, if you think about it, I actually did a little too well. I've actually raised this platform up a little too high. So I throw the lever and get the windmill started again, and when it's at the perfect height, I shut the windmill off. Now, we can just go around and attach all the bridges exactly how we want them. The rest of day 100 is just spent working on the small details, putting bridges in place, getting everything looking nice, rebuilding up our trees, and a few other little details to make this whole entire thing look perfect. Of course, we spend some time unpacking everything, connecting everything, just sprucing everything up so that it looks perfect. Just want to make sure we get everything up to the captain's standards. In truth, however, I'm actually pretty satisfied with this. Like I said, I'm pretty proud of what we've done here. The raising water is something that very few YouTubers deal with, so there's no tutorial on how to work with this. I had to figure a lot of this out on my own. As for getting all these platforms to raise up and down, I mean, why would you ever do this? There's no tutorials on how to make your base fly up into the sky, because why would you? All of this was brand new territory. And I gotta say, it's pretty amazing how we found some pretty ingenuitive solutions to all of these crazy problems. And on top of that, with all these beautiful blocks and these perfect mods on this amazing tropical island, we actually turned quite a terrifying scenario into a pretty amazing vacation. I don't know if I could say it was relaxing, but what I can definitely say is this was a pretty fun 100 days. Technically 101 days. Even at the end of 101 days, I could play this even more. Playing mod packs with realistic water physics and all these cool farms, I could do this all day. Speaking of which, I do take a little bit of time to get all the trees back in place, like I said I would. Knowing my luck, that probably won't be a chicken, but let's go ahead and throw these 14 eggs. Who knows, maybe the captain's luck will turn around after all. And with almost our very last egg, I'm sure glad it did. I'm not just talking about this playthrough. Sure, we were lucky that nothing went too crazy. We didn't get blown up by a volcano and we never truly got flooded. I'm of course talking about how lucky I am to have you guys. The best crew a captain could ask for. And not to mention all the love you guys leave in the comments, which you totally don't have to do. You don't have to like, you don't have to subscribe or do any of that. Seriously, every time I see one little view, I feel like I've made someone stay. I don't know if that's true. I would like to think that maybe just for an hour or just a couple of minutes, I'm bringing a little bit of brightness into your life. And if that's true, I'll never stop making these videos. And we'll be back at this again real soon. Promise you that.